You're listening to Fanfiction Reader, where stories come alive through sound. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the tale.
Chapter 51 The Open Vision. After lunch, Duncan watched Nina clean up the dining table. He wanted to help wash the dishes, but was forcibly stopped by the other party on the grounds that Uncle is not in good health, and the doctor told him to avoid contact with cold water, so he had to lean on the stairs near the entrance. While reading the newspaper bought in the morning, I watched the girl busy in the kitchen. This kind of daily scene, which seemed like an ordinary family, made him feel a little weird. At this moment, Nina's voice came from the kitchen. "Uncle Duncan, is there any news in the newspaper?" Duncan looked down at the newspaper, and the first thing he saw was the date August 14, 19 in the New City State calendar, followed by the news that the church judge led a team to arrest dozens of heretics. This should be the most important front-page news. "It says that the judge led a team to arrest dozens of sun heretics," he said casually. He also said that this is the largest heresy gathering that the church has successfully cracked down in the past 4 years, and there are some reminders to the citizens to pay attention to night safety, pay attention to identifying things of heretical beliefs around you. "Ah, I also heard about it on the way here." Nina swiftly put the cleaned bowls into the cupboard. "It's really scary. I heard from my teacher before that those cultists who worship the sun even it will do the thing of sacrificing living people to the sun god. Who do you think would believe in such a sect so madly?" Duncan didn't know what to say for a while, because no matter what he said, he felt that this matter was too delicate. Should it be said that he had experienced the sacrificial package immersively on that altar not long ago, or should he say that your uncle is such a mad cultist? However, one thing is obvious. From Nina's reaction, she obviously doesn't know the fact that her uncle is a heretic of the sun. She even has the normal 3 views of ordinary people, thinking that the sun god believes in the kind of living people sacrifice is a terrible thing. The uncle in her perspective is just a little grumpy due to illness, a little drunk, and some weird friends. Perhaps the body he occupied was once a bloody rotten person, but at least he did raise Nina to this day, and so far he has protected this girl from the belief of the sun god. Perhaps one day in the future, a certain cultist named Ron will really degenerate to the last step, dragging his last relatives in the world into this endless abyss, but at least before today, all this has not yet happened. It won't happen in the future either. "Uncle? Why did you suddenly stop talking?" Nina was a little curious about the silence behind her. She looked back with concern in her eyes. "Are you feeling uncomfortable again?" "No, I'm just a little distracted." Duncan reacted and shook his head. "You're right, it's really a crazy thing. The newspaper also mentioned asking citizens to pay attention to safety and report heresy around them in time. You also try not to run around outside of school and home." Nina nodded, but then said with a hesitant look on her face, But I have an appointment with a classmate, and I will go to the museum to visit in 2 days." "Museum?" Duncan asked casually. "What museum?" "It's the one near the school, near the Maritime Museum on the edge of the upper city," Nina explained. "I heard that offshore mineral specimens are being exhibited there recently. Is that okay?" "Go if you want." Duncan thought for a while, nodded, and said, "Now there are church guards and city-state sheriff's patrols everywhere, and those cultists won't be so bold as to jump out these 2 days." Nina nodded happily. "Yeah. Are you still going to school this afternoon?" Duncan asked again. "Well, it's history class in the afternoon. I don't want to miss Mr. Morse's class." Nina nodded and said, "That's a well-known expert in the field of history, but it's really strange that a famous old man like him, why don't you give lectures at the university in the upper city, but come to the public school in the lower city? More than half of the students in the class don't like history class, and they all sleep when the old man is in class." Duncan shook his head frankly. "I don't know. A joke, not to mention the old Mr. Morris who taught history. He even just met Nina. He would have to rack his memory for a few hours to figure out where the public school Nina went to. And even the original owner of this body probably didn't know much about his niece's recent situation by the time Duncan took over his life. He had obviously been stuck in son's heresy for too long." Nina still had classes to attend in the afternoon, so she didn't stay in the antique shop for long after lunch. After hurriedly packing up her things, she took the textbook she had left at home, and the girl trotted away from home. It was nearly an hour's journey from the antique store to the downtown public school, and she had to waste every minute to avoid being late for old Mr. Morse's class. Of course, there is public transportation in the city. Even in the relatively backward downtown area, trams and trolley buses driven by steam engines will drive through the streets, but these require a ticket fee of 4 to 6 pesos. Nina smiled and told Duncan that running more is good for health. Her commute to school would be a lot easier if she had a bicycle, something Duncan had seen riding on the streets of downtown. In a society that has already developed steam machinery, bicycles, an industrial product, are not too expensive for ordinary people to afford, but they are definitely not cheap for the residents of the downtown area. A common bicycle may cost a third the family's living expenses for half a month to a month. Can be regarded as a burden. Duncan didn't know where his current identity would go in the future, but seeing Nina trotting all the way and disappearing around the corner of the street, he always felt, as long as he had spare energy, he should treat this girl well. Even for the vegetable soup and salty pancakes from before. What's more, she is still a studious student. Maybe I should think about ways to make money in this civilized city-state. With various thoughts in his mind, he put down the newspaper in his hand and walked slowly to the end of the corridor on the second floor. After opening the narrow window, he looked at the city streets under the sun in a daze. In this world, abnormalities and visions have long been accompanied by the progress of civilization. Neither the authorities nor the church have concealed things in the supernatural realm from the public. Even a girl like Nina who is still in school can learn from textbooks, directly learn the content related to anomalies and visions. She even knew the anomalous and anomalous classification standards left by the ancient kingdom of Crete and still in use today, and she also knew the public numbers and names of some anomalies and anomalous phenomena whose laws had been proven. Yes, this part of knowledge is even open to the whole society, although not all. The authorities and churches of each city-state have recognized a list. On this list, the most famous or dangerous anomalies and visions have their own special numbers. These numbers are not permanent. Under special circumstances, they will be some anomalies, and anomalies are eliminated or transformed due to various reasons, and their numbers may also be transferred or vacant. But no matter how they change, there is one thing that is generally certain: anomalies and visions that can have independent numbers and names must have their own special dangers or strengths. The authorities released the list of some of the anomalies and anomalies. On the one hand, it is to ensure that every citizen is aware of these specific dangers so that all people have common sense of self-protection. On the other hand, because of some anomalies and anomalies, it is too close to people's lives. These things have even penetrated into every corner of ordinary people's lives and every aspect of social operation. People can see them at any time, and there is no way to hide them, and there is no need to hide them. Duncan raised his head and stared silently at the sky. Vision Flower 1, the sun. The huge light body running in the sky, the great vision that dominated the sky in the deep sea era, was born in the early morning of the second day after the collapse of the ancient kingdom of Crete. The scope of influence the whole world, the unit of influence infinite, it operates and moves on its own, and cannot be interfered by human beings, which meets the definition of vision. According to historical records, on the day when the ancient kingdom collapsed, the sea was turbulent and the city-state was shattered. All members of the first dynasty died generously in the dark, and their blood soaked the sea. Then the vision cloud one rose from the sea. Since then, the boundless sea has appeared. The tranquility of the day. The ancient kingdom of Crete, the first city-state civilization established by the survivors after the opening of the Deep Sea Age, lasted only 100 years, but left countless legacy, blessings to this day. The word Crete means eternal night in ancient Chinese. It was a night that lasted for a century. All this is written in Nina's history textbook. Chapter 52 Two-wire operation. This world has experienced astonishing historical changes. With the Great Annihilation as the node, the whole world and even the basic laws have undergone a huge change, so that the Deep Sea era after the Great Annihilation and the era of order before the Great Annihilation can almost be seen. Make two completely different worlds. But even so, there are still people who persevere in sorting out the historical materials passed down from the Great Annihilation to the present, and try to sort out the true appearance of history from the fragmented and even contradictory files of various city-states. Unfortunately, perhaps because the severance of inheritance was too thorough, or perhaps the contradictions in the records of various city-states were too chaotic, people have not yet been able to find a more complete and credible historical record before the Great Annihilation. No one knows what the world was like in the Age of Order. But fortunately, the world after the ancient kingdom of Crete has a relatively clear historical inheritance. Although city-states rise and fall in the boundless sea, at least the continuation of civilization itself has never been cut off. The memory of the ancient kingdom is either left in books, or engraved on huge stones, or passed down from generation to generation in ancient and hidden families and associations. Scholars believe that more than half of the credit for the inheritance of civilization in the Deep Sea Age can continue to this day under extremely unfavorable conditions should be attributed to the miracle that illuminates the world, Vision 001, the sun. This is the vision with the largest influence and power known to mankind at present. In fact, because of its size and its existence is so natural, many scholars are debating whether the sun itself is a vision or not. It is a natural phenomenon, but the first batch of recorders after the destruction of the ancient kingdom of Crete, that is, the survivors of the ancient kingdom, referred to it as Vision 001, and this ancient number has been passed down like this, and it has not changed until now. Obviously, not all visions are horrible and harmful things. Vision 1 has brought safety to the world for half of the time. During the day when the sun shines, almost all the pollution from the depths of the world will be suppressed below sea level. And it is with such a stable daytime existence that it is possible for the civilizations of various city-states to develop to this day. According to the information left by the ancient kingdom of Crete, after the opening of the Deep Sea era and before the appearance of Vision 001, for a whole century, the entire world was shrouded in night. The creation of the world was cold and dim. The glow has illuminated the boundless sea for 100 years. That's why the people of the Old Kingdom called their country Eternal Night, and even called the era they lived in by this. Duncan stood at the narrow window, looking thoughtfully at the sunlit world. The world before the Great Annihilation. What was it like? Did the sun shine on all things in this world before that terrible 100 years of eternal night? Presumably there are, because no matter how many gaps and contradictions there are in the ancient records of various city-states, there is one thing in common. The era of order is a bright, safe, and prosperous era. But no matter what, that prosperous and bright era has passed, and now the boundless sea is illuminated by Vision 1. Everyone in the world knows this and is grateful for the day brought by Vision 1. Therefore, in such a background of the times, those cultists who worshipped the ancient real sun and even used it to attack the sun in today's world and call it a false sun will appear particularly paranoid and distorted, and are well known by the world. Not allowed. They are not only attacking the sun in the sky, they are attacking the reliance of human civilization struggling to survive in the deep sea age until today. But Duncan knew that the sun worshipped by those cultists is very likely to be the true appearance of the sun that existed before the Great Annihilation. From a certain point of view, those cultists have grasped a part of the real history. Unfortunately, that real history has become the source of their distortion in this era. Duncan doesn't think that the ambitions of those cultists can be realized, and he doesn't think they can really create a flaming fusion star by sacrificing living people. The distortion of this world is far beyond imagination. Not just the loss of stars can be explained. In the night sky here, there is not even a single star. Duncan returned to the room, closed the door, waved to the cabinet next to him, and called AI down, who was using the cabinet to grind the shell. The pigeon landed on his shoulder and tilted his head. Who is calling the fleet? Duncan ignored the bird, but walked to the bed and found the sun emblem that he had previously hidden in the corner of the bed. After thinking for a while, he went to the cabinet again, opened the door, and found the drawer where the spirits were stored. Take out 2 bottles of spirits from it. There seemed to be something stuck on the wine bottle. Duncan turned the bottle curiously and saw that it was a small note with Nina's handwriting on it. Drink less wine. The note appears to have been posted a long time ago. There was one on every bottle of wine and none of them had any effect. Duncan smiled, closed the drawers and cabinets, returned to the bed with 2 bottles of wine and the sun emblem, and poked AI again to let him see what he was carrying. Try to take them aboard the Lost, if you can. The pigeon immediately flapped its wings and made a proud voice. Darling, free shipping with SF Express. Duncan nodded, let himself lie down in a comfortable position, and began to prepare for the shuttle. He had been away from the lost homeland for too long, and although nothing would happen to the ship if he didn't watch it, but as the captain, he couldn't lock himself in the room all the time. Nina was going to school in the afternoon, and she had other things to do after the course ended, and it would be very late when she finished her work. Duncan had already discussed with her, asking her to stay in the school dormitory for another night today and come back after school tomorrow afternoon. During this period of time, Duncan happened to study the details of the Spirit World shuttle, and at the same time, according to his previous conception, tested whether he could control the physical activities on both sides at the same time without completely cutting off the soul projection. According to my perception of the homeless when I was here, this should be feasible. When occupying this fresh body, the connection between himself and the main body of the lost country was obviously stronger and more stable, which gave him confidence and inspiration. The calculations in his mind slowly settled down. Duncan exhaled lightly, a dark green flame ignited on his shoulders, and amidst the crackling sound, the pigeon AE turned into the form of a dead bird in the blink of an eye, and the brass compass also snapped open. The boundless darkness, the glowing lines, the twinkling stars, the familiar feeling floods in, and the track back to the lost country is the brightest route in this darkness. Duncan's consciousness quickly shuttled along this route, and in the blink of an eye, he felt that his main consciousness had awakened in the captain's bedroom of the lost home. But before leaving that dark space completely, he relied on his control over the fire of the spirit body, and his own soul to forcefully break in an attempt to preserve the connection between himself and that antique shop. Homeless, in the captain's bedroom, Duncan slowly opened his eyes. He looked down at his hands and looked around. What he saw were familiar furnishings, and what he heard was the familiar sound of ocean waves. He slowly got up from the chair, but in the depths of his consciousness, the touch of another body was clearly transmitted. A smile slowly appeared on Duncan's face, and then, according to his own understanding, he began to try to perceive and control his other body in the antique shop through that little distant connection. He tried several times. On the second floor of Duncan's antique store in the city-state of Pearland, the antique store manager who was lying quietly on the bed suddenly opened his eyes. In the next second, the body lying on the bed turned its head a little bit with a stiff expression, observing the room left and right like a zombie, and then slowly moved its hands and feet, as if forcibly controlling a rusty machine. Let your limbs start to move. If outsiders saw this scene, they would be so frightened that they would report to the nearby sheriff on the spot, saying that someone here was possessed by an evil spirit. Looking at it from another angle, it seems that there is nothing wrong with reporting like this. While Duncan in the captain's room of the lost home was turning these weird thoughts in his mind, he used a remote perspective to remotely control the body and began to move slowly. It's hard, and it's harder to direct bodily movements with just a few remote connections when the consciousness is not in the body, which is harder than asking a novice to control a 28-jointed marionette. But after many attempts, he still managed to get the body in the city-state of plan to sit up from the bed. In the next second, the remote picture in his mind suddenly spun. The body fell to the floor. Duncan sighed. Well, it seems that I have to practice for a long time. It's time to push the book. The title of the book is I Kidnapped the Timeline, from science fiction classification, rewriting the timeline, and avoiding the doomsday in the future. If you are interested, you can take a look till to chapter 53. The captain is not at home. One will, paying attention to two perspectives at the same time, controlling two bodies, doing completely different things. This is a rather novel experience for Duncan. It is also an extremely difficult challenge. He thinks that he should not be regarded as an ordinary person now, but even so, it is not easy to control the two bodies without any burden. Barely controlling the body in the antique shop, he climbed back to the bed and continued to lift the corpse. But judging from the feedback from the depths of his consciousness, he thought that sooner or later he would be able to master this dual-purpose technique. It just needed a long time for familiarization and training. After placing the body in the antique shop properly and paying a little attention there, Duncan finally breathed a sigh of relief. It is the most important thing to ensure the connection with the remote body immediately after finishing the walk in the spirit world. This is directly related to whether the foothold I have finally found in the civilized world can be used for a long time. After this matter is settled, he felt much more relaxed, and he had the energy to focus on other things. A sound of flapping wings came from the side at this moment, and the pigeon Au ran up to Duncan in 2s and 3s. The bird held its chest high, and there was a lot of pride in its eyes and tone. The teleportation was successful. Duncan looked past the pigeon to the table behind it. A light golden sun emblem and 2 bottles of spirits were quietly placed there at the moment. A smile slowly appeared on Duncan's face, and then the smile became brighter and brighter. Feasible. It is feasible to let this pigeon carry cargo in the process of walking in the spirit world. And it's not limited to extraordinary items, even ordinary items can be sent over. With a satisfied smile, he got up and took a few items on the table, first checked the situation of the sun emblem, and confirmed that there was still a faint power flowing in this extraordinary item, which was that he had used the fire of the spirit body. After completely occupying and transforming the power, he then picked up one of the bottles of spirits, took off the lid and put it in front of his nose, and the strong smell of alcohol came immediately. Duncan looked down at AI, who had already started pacing on the table with his head up. High efficiency, high quality, and free shipping. He began to like this nagging pigeon. The pigeon also immediately noticed the master's sight. It immediately trotted to Duncan, pecked at the table with its beak shell, and shouted loudly, "Order French fries! Order French fries!" There are no French fries on board for the time being, but I think this will not be a problem soon. Duncan happily grabbed the pigeon and held it in his hand, eyeing each other's mung beans. I just don't know that every time you send something, what is the upper limit? Is it limited to dead objects, and whether there will be packet loss? This needs to be tested a few more times. The pigeon thought for a while, then raised its neck. Packet loss? Oh, the page is missing. Yes, that's what I'm afraid of. Your name always makes me feel that you are not old and reliable. Duncan's thoughts diverged for a while, and he was greatly encouraged by the fact that the pigeon successfully transmitted more things to the lost home. This made him think of more feasible attempts, not just limited to delivering supplies to the ship, but this bird's erratic IQ and poor contact logic always made him dare not let go of his mind. After thinking about it, he still felt that it will take a few more tests before actually establishing a supply line between the lost homeland and the land. Temporarily having a plan in mind for the next step, Duncan stood up from the chair and walked towards the door leading to the chart room, but stopped after taking 2 steps. He moved his joints on the spot, stretched his legs and feet, and felt the touch from his limbs. Flexible, powerful, without fatigue or sluggishness, as if he had just been sitting at the desk for a while. However, he was very clear that it had been more than a day since he had left the lost homeland, and when he was walking in the spirit world, his body stayed in the captain's dormitory, maintaining the posture of sitting in front of the table. Duncan carefully felt the limbs and bones. Through his precise grasp of his physical condition, he could almost be sure that this body completely maintained the state at the moment of walking in the spirit world, as if, the moment the consciousness left, the body fell into some kind of stagnation in general. Is this also the special power of Captain Duncan? Or, because I am actually half a ghost now, so I will be as tireless as a ghost? He wondered curiously, but had no clue. He has begun to understand the history of this world and the rise and fall of civilized city-states, but he can't even solve the secrets of himself. But in any case, this does not seem to be a bad thing. This body does not require much maintenance, which means that he can devote part of his energy to other areas with more confidence. Duncan is a very open-minded person. In other words, he is very good at putting aside those temporarily unsolvable puzzles. After thinking it through in his mind, he came to the door and pushed open the door leading to the chart room. Captain Duncan is back. The oak door creaked lightly, breaking the silence in the chart room. The next second, the wooden goat's head carved on the edge of the nautical table suddenly made a rattling sound, and the piece of wood quickly turned its head to the sound. The direction, under the empty gaze, it slowly opened the mouth. Name? Duncan Abu Normer. Duncan glanced at the goat's head. I'm back. Ah! The great Captain Duncan has returned to his loyal ship Lost. I'm sorry, Captain, but you have been traveling in the spirit world for a long time this time, and I need to confirm it again. After all, this is the rule you set. How do you feel? How's your mood? How's your body? How's the harvest of this long spiritual world walk? Did you find something interesting? Would you like to share this walking journey with your loyal first officer and the following abbreviation? Have you noticed that I just now did you use abbreviate the following? Miss Alice said that would make the words a bit more condensed, and you might prefer this brevity. Shut up, your condensed words are all made up for in the rest of the nonsense. Duncan glanced at the noisy thing. Did anything happen on the ship while I was away? Ah, Captain Duncan's sternness and humor are as usual. What you taught is that everything is normal on board, and your loyal following omissions have perfectly completed the helm task you have entrusted. In addition, Miss Alice has come twice, but it is not a big deal, once with the cable, once with the anchor. Duncan was about to go through the chart room to check the situation on the deck, but he stopped immediately when he heard the words of the goat's head. He asked with a question mark on his face, why did she fight with the cables and anchor cables? He could perceive the situation on the lost home during his walk in the spirit world, but he didn't pay too much attention to it. He could only vaguely feel Alice walking around on the ship and exploring. How could this be taken advantage of? Why was she still so lively on the boat when she was not around? Oh, actually Miss Alice is kind too, Goat's Head replied immediately. She thought it was bad to have nothing to do on board, so she wanted to find something to do. So she went to tidy up the cables and maintain the winch, but I forgot to tell her the cable is ticklish. The anchor needs a nap. Duncan, Captain, are you angry? Duncan's sudden silence made the goat's head tense, and it shook its wooden head back and forth. It's actually not a big deal, and besides, new members on a ship always need to adjust to get better. I got along with the old sailors. Now they have entered the stage of fighting, which shows that Miss Alice is progressing quickly in integrating into the group. In fact, she is quite popular on the ship, and most of the lost country. As soon as the goat's head was halfway through speaking, he heard a sudden rush of footsteps on the deck outside, and then the door of the captain's cabin was pulled open, and Alice rushed in hastily. Mister, why the shells in the ammunition depot keep rolling around and won't let me? Duncan silently glanced at Alice. Alice also found Duncan standing by the nautical table, looking at him stiffly and awkwardly. Well, this is the third time, the goat hair on the nautical table sighed. This time she is fighting with shells. I admit that Miss Alice's running-in process on the ship may have been a little bit too lively. Alice shrank her neck, probably strengthening her joints, and nervously looked at Duncan with a blank expression. Captain, you were back well. Duncan nodded, with a calm expression on his face. It seems that you had a good time on the boat while I was away? Alice. Chapter 54. The air during her leave on the lost country. Alice's activity on the ship was a little bit more than Duncan's expected. He has always felt that this gothic doll is an elegant and decent young lady, although she turns around, surfs, and talks trash, but she is indeed elegant and quiet under normal circumstances, and she is very cautious in everything she does on the boat. When in an unfamiliar environment, he is honest and responsible, and when he has nothing to do, he will even lie quietly in his box like an ordinary doll, highlighting a harmless painting style for humans and animals. But now it seems that she is only so quiet when she is nearby. The suddenly low atmosphere in the room made Alice feel a little nervous. She carefully glanced at the expressionless Duncan. "Captain, are you not angry? I can explain. I know, you are helping, but you just failed." Duncan glanced at Miss Doll, with a helpless tone. "But since you also know that many things on this ship are alive, next time you want to do something, can't you check with me or my mate?" Alice immediately nodded again, and loudly agreed. "Okay, Captain, no problem, Captain." Then she immediately turned her head to the goat's head, muttering in a low voice, "Is there such a thing as attempted help?" The rare succinctness of the goat's head. "Now there is. Okay, if you really want to help, go check the dried fish on the deck, or go to the kitchen to tidy up the warehouse where the ingredients are stored, and free up some space. In the future, we may have the opportunity to replenish the lost home." Duncan sighed, looked at Alice, and said, "Don't deal with the artillery and ammunition depots below the deck. They don't have complete intelligence like the goat's head. Those dangerous things will only do something to external stimuli. Instinctive reaction. In case the ammunition depot thinks it has been sabotaged or invaded, then I can only rescue you with a broom and dustbin." Alice shrank her neck when she heard this, and repeatedly agreed to turn around and leave the captain's room. But watching the puppet leave, Duncan couldn't help showing a smile on his face. This is indeed a very interesting guy. The little chaos is nothing to worry about, and the lifeless ghost ship is indeed lively because of her tossing up and down. "It seems that you are in a good mood, Captain." The voice of the goat's head came from the side. You have something in your hand. What is that? Is it the harvest of your spiritual journey this time? What about the small knife?" Duncan glanced at the sun emblem in his hand. He left the spirits in the room, and the emblem was in his hand, ready to study it when he was bored. "It's a trophy," he nodded. "It's the same as the ritual knife last time." "Oh, as expected of the great Captain Duncan. You can always return with a full load, and you are also an extraordinary thing with magical power. Wait, is this a sun talisman? You know this thing?" Duncan raised his eyebrows. "That's right, the sun amulet. A few daring cultists gave me this thing. It's too kind to refuse." "I know a little bit." The goat head seemed to be carefully observing the emblem, and his voice was slightly hesitant. The madmen who followed the ancient real sun regarded this object as a sacred object, and they thought that the real sun was made of metal. It can infuse the power of the sun into the talisman by quenching it with human blood. Through this method, extraordinary things with weak power can be mass-produced. This kind of talisman is a person with a certain status among the followers of the sun, a status symbol and a tool they use to identify their fellow men and to distinguish believers from heretics, distinguish between believers and heretics. There is indeed this function, Duncan understood, although I personally feel that this function is useless. What happened to those daring heretics? Goat's head seemed to hesitate when he said this. They are mostly paranoid and ignorant fanatics. Even the worst pirates are unwilling to follow this kind of chasing ancient things. To deal with the lunatics, if they dare to offend, they are no longer in this world, Duncan said while observing the change in Goat's head's tone while controlling his expression. "It seems that you don't like these people who call themselves sun believers too." After dealing with Goat Head for such a long time, Duncan has actually roughly figured out the way of this weird first mate. There would be no out-of-control changes. On this basis, he became more courageous when talking with the other party. Now, he can cautiously ask the other party for some information. Who would like those madmen who follow the ancient real sun? The light and order they yearn for are no longer tolerated by this world. Goat Head answered Duncan's question as usual. Even if it is the lost country, also bathed in the sunshine of this era, even the evil spirits wandering in the deep sea would not like the sun. Before the deep sea era, probably only those cultists would think that the resurrection of the real sun is a good thing. Speaking of the goat's head, he paused and said with a touch of emotion, "But then again, 99% of those cultists are actually just a bunch of brainwashed idiots. Knowing what they are following and worshipping, they regard the so-called children of the sun as prophets and saviors, and yearn for the ancient world described by those descendants as the kingdom of heaven. But in my opinion, the children of the sun do not regard those fanatical believers are treated as people. They are no different from the children of the deep sea." Son of the sun? What does it mean? And it sounds like there are some children of the deep sea? What the hell is this? Exclamation. Duncan's heart moved, and a brand new unfamiliar term popped up on his face, bringing new confusion. He played with the sun emblem in his hand calmly, as if asking casually, "Children of the sun? I haven't met them. It's normal. The sons of the sun don't dare to show up in the civilized world casually. Even if they pretend to be humans, the hyenas of the Holy See can smell the smell of heresy in their shadows in minutes after all. After all, they are also a kind of children. As the residue of ancient things, they should honestly stay in the gutter of history. Well, among all kinds of children, they are the only ones who can do things like this. Duncan suddenly discovered that the goat's head's habit of nagging from time to time is actually very beneficial, although 9,000 of its 10,000 sentences a day are nonsense. But as long as luck catches up, it can also come out useful and formative. Due to the fact that he has not fully grasped the details of the goat's head, Duncan's inquiry can only be indirect, and he dare not ask too blatantly. The clue that Tokishibo failed to grasp, sons, this seems to be quite important information. In this world, there are some creatures called children, and they are all tolerated by the civilized world without exception, and the goat head calls them ancient things, the residue of. Although there are a large number of believers who worship the true sun god, it seems that most of them are just insignificant pawns, ignorant, blind and brainwashed fanatics. In their church structure, they still have status. Higher than them, the real ruling class, is the guy called the son of the sun. Those sons of the sun don't often show up in the civilized world. They seem to have other hidden places that are unknown to the world, and they influence the world's sun god sect through remote control, secretly collecting sacrifices and energy. Finally, it is also the point that should be the most concerned about the current Duncan. Goat's head is full of contempt for those cultists, and the children of the sun standing behind the cultists. This shows that the lost country, or the real Captain Duncan, is not in the same camp as these guys called children. It should even be counted as a hostile camp. It seemed that it was the right decision to tell Goat-Head about his dealings with the Sun cultists during this spirit world walk, otherwise, he didn't know when he would know these useful information. This kind of overly secret knowledge would not be written in Nina's textbook. Duncan left the captain's cabin, holding the Sun talisman, and walked thoughtfully on the deck of the lost home. There are many kinds of heirs, and according to the information revealed by the Goat-Head, the heirs are all remnants of ancient things, plus the fact that the Sun believers follow the ancient real Sun before the Great Annihilation. He has reasonable reasons to doubt these so-called offspring are most likely the product of the Great Annihilation, and their birth may be traced back to the era of order before the Great Annihilation. There are children of the Sun on the sea level and children of the deep sea in the deep sea. Duncan walked to the side of the ship without knowing it. He glanced at the deep blue sea outside, feeling a little curious in his heart. In the sea there are not only fish. Chapter 55 Underground Temple. In the end, Duncan didn't understand what a child was. Goat's Head is vague about this aspect, and it seems that it does not know the details of these ancient things wandering on the edge of the civilized world. As for Duncan, he can only summarize a little idea from the limited clues. The descendants are the products of ancient times, and they hate the modern world. They have strange and dangerous powers, and they hide in the dark in a low-key manner. Except for the children of the Sun, other children almost never show up in the civilized world. It is on the edge that threatens the safety of explorers. And in all this information, there is one more interesting point. The sons of the Sun seem to be able to pretend to be human beings. Only the supernatural beings of the church can tell the disguised sons of the Sun from ordinary people. Duncan thought of the recent changes in the Pulan city-state, and thought of those Sun believers who suddenly became active after a few years of low-key. Behind the high-profile activities of the cultists, are they ordered by the children? Those ancient and strange existences are plotting something in the Pulan city-state? Duncan stood on the edge of the deck of the lost home, staring at the turbulent sea beneath his feet for a long time. There are also descendants in the deep sea, which are ancient existences different from the sons of the Sun, and they threaten the safety of the long-distance fleets between various city-states. Duncan was wary and curious about these things in the deep sea. He believed that even though he had never dealt with these things before, as long as the lost home was still wandering in the sea, he would encounter these weird things one day sooner or later, and there was no harm in making more preparations before that. Whether it's collecting intelligence, further controlling one's own strength, or discovering the potential of the lost homelander, they are all planning for the future. Of course, he is not afraid of the hidden dangers in the deep sea. After all, he has been floating on the sea with this ship for so long, and he can more or less guess how many weird things there are in the deep sea. It's just one of the countless weird threats. The so-called lice don't itch and debt doesn't worry. As the captain of the lost country, he has to be wary of so many things here. He pondered on the deck for a long time, and found that what he needs to worry about most now is whether the supply channel he finally found will be effective. Will those sons of the deep sea affect his fishing? Although Pigeon Eye has the ability to transport supplies, it is still unclear how much it can carry and how reliable it is, not to mention that the Pulan city-state is an orderly place, and the supplies transported to the ship also cost money to buy. Yes, so this supply line is not sure when it will come in handy. Coupled with the lucrative catch from the last fishing trip, Duncan is very clear that the improvement of the living conditions of the lost homeland is ultimately inseparable from the gift of nature. And those children are now a hidden danger they may affect the gift of nature. Duncan was a little worried. He just hoped that the evil things in the sea would not affect his fishing. The bright gas lamps glowed, dispelling the darkness in the underground facilities of the church. The deep sea runes engraved in the long corridor exude reassuring power. With an invisible giant net, the underground structure of the entire building is shrouded in a sacred and quiet atmosphere. Fanna walked in the underground sanctuary of the church. This sacred and quiet place calmed down her restless mood a little bit. The goddess of storm is in charge of the most powerful force in the boundless sea, but she does not only have a violent side that symbolizes storm. This ancient god also controls the power of tranquility and sealing. Just as there are two sides to the sea, calm and storm always accompany each other, the same is true of the goddess's authority. The underground of the cathedral symbolizes the mirror image of the storm. There are many gods in this world who are one body with two sides, or have the characteristics of one body and two sides. The god of death is in charge of vitality at the same time, and the god of wisdom also has the power to deprive reason and ignorance. Ordinary people may not know much about this aspect, but as a high-ranking clergyman, Fanna has a wealth of knowledge in this area. She also knows that it is precisely because of the two-faced characteristics of many gods that some extremely controversial, even near heretical ideas have been born. Some scholars even believe that the entire world is also two-faced in a certain dimension. There is even a dry land where the sea and the land are completely mirrored. There is an endless dry land, and extremely rare rivers and oases are dotted in the aridity. In that dry land, there are even intelligent civilizations that seem to be different from the real world. They are reflections of everything in reality. These outrageous conjectures based entirely on conjecture are of course not recognized, and even Bishop Valentine, who is known to be enlightened in the city-state of Plan, scoffed when he heard this statement. In the old man's original words, there is a subspace at the bottom of this world is enough to make people's heads big, so some folk theologians should stop hanging things under the subspace, okay? Fanna shook her head suddenly, letting her uncontrollable thoughts gather again. Underneath the quiet cathedral, people's thoughts can easily spread out uncontrollably. This is because the mirror image of the storm brings overly peaceful psychological hints. Psychological barrier, this effect is invisible, but powerful, and even a rigorously trained judge like her cannot be immune. But on the other hand, this special environment has a special use. For example, let some fanatical and crazy cultist speak. Fanna stopped at the end of the corridor of the underground sanctuary. There were several doors leading to various interrogation rooms, and a statue of the storm goddess stood quietly in the foyer between the several doors. This icon is different from the statue of the goddess on the ground of the church. The statue on the ground has its hands open, as if it is accepting the worship of all peoples, surrounded by infinite majesty. But on the ground, the statue of the goddess folds its hands in front of its chest, quiet and gentle, like a girl listening attentively. But no matter which icon it is, the face is covered with a light veil. This symbolizes the unknowability of the gods. This listening icon with folded hands is another form of the storm goddess, maiden of the sea of tranquility. She suppresses the water below the sea level and protects the peace of the city-state's underground world. Fanna bowed in front of the icon of the Maiden of Tranquility, then turned and pushed open the door of a nearby interrogation room. The sound of the door shaft turning broke the tranquility in the underground facility. After the door opened, a spacious, but dimly lit room appeared in front of Fanna. There is a large table in the center of the room and a mess. Heidi in a long black dress is getting up from the table. On the opposite side of the table is a chair with restraint chains. A Sun heretic is sitting quietly on the chair superior. The heretic was blind-eyed, leaning crookedly against the armrest next to him, as if his reason and strength had been pulled out of his body, leaving only chaos. There is still a strong smell of incense in the room and a mess. Heidi's medical kit is still on the table. Inside, you can see a large empty syringe, wriggling thorny vines, and a golden cone that still seems to be bloodstained. "Oh, Your Excellency Fanna, you came just in time, Miss." Heidi turned her head to greet the door opening. "I just finished a treatment." Fanna glanced over Heidi's medical kit. Her expression remained the same as before. "To be honest, it's still hard for me to connect your set of things with the treatment. These are the standard tools of psychiatrists. Well, I admit that I may use them more frequently than ordinary doctors, Miss," Heidi said, shrugging. "But who asked me to be employed by? What about the hypnotist who often works for the church in the city hall? The patients I have come into contact with are not normal patients, especially cultists like this. Shaking crystals and low-frequency pendulums don't have a triple-dose midnight flask is easy to use. I very much suspect that the reason why you inject 3 times the dose to the cultists every time is because you can only hold 3 times the dose in this big syringe. Fan Na complained about the acquaintance in front of her, but then shook her head. But it doesn't matter, as long as you can pry these guys' mouths open. Tell me, what do you gain? Yes, and the harvest is not small, the situation is weird, Miss. Heidi replied immediately. I have already deeply hypnotized several cult members and used some special methods. And now I can basically confirm these participants in the sacrifice. The cultists of the ritual most likely didn't go mad after the ritual got out of control. Didn't you go crazy after the ceremony got out of control? Fana frowned immediately. Although she already knew that the complexity of this matter would exceed expectations after talking with Bishop Valentine, Heidi's words still exceeded her expectations. What does it mean? I searched their memories and found that these people's thinking, or cognitive logic, had problems before the last failed sacrifice ceremony. They were affected by some kind of cognitive filter, so that in their memory, huh? Your Excellency Fana, you don't seem too surprised? Chapter 56 Soup for dinner. Of course, the unsurprising expression on Fan Na's face didn't hide it from Heidi. The psychiatrist who often cooperates with the church immediately guessed what was going on from the judge's reaction. After a little hesitation, she asked cautiously, it seems there is a big problem behind this incident. Fan Na nodded. It's a big problem. Heidi thought for a while and said quickly while packing her medical kit, I'm on vacation tomorrow, and it might be a mess. Heidi, you may have already established a connection with this incident. Vanna glanced at Heidi. I'm sorry, but including me, everyone who appeared at the scene at that time had been exposed to some kind of cognition under the pollution. The mental problems you found in these cultists have actually happened to each of us. But, thanks to the blessing of the goddess, our pollution is not deep, so we just woke up at this time. Damn it, I knew that this kind of thing would happen sooner or later in this line of work. Heidi finally stopped packing the medical kit, and she covered her forehead. I should have listened to my father's advice and inherited. He could pursue his career as an antique appraiser, or even follow his mother's advice and become a history teacher at a public school in the crossroads. That would be much safer than dealing with cultists. Think about it. At least your current job is enough to allow you to maintain a decent life in the upper city. Fana shook her head. In front of Heidi, who was about the same age and had known her for many years, her attitude seemed more approachable than in front of her subordinates. Let's talk about your findings, which may help the church and the city hall to grasp the situation. It's actually very simple, an obvious violation, Heidi sighed, talking about the clue she dug out from the subconscious of those cultists. On the night of the sacrificial ceremony, a sacrifice was placed on the totem of the sun. According to the clues we found at the scene, the sacrifice who caused the loss of control was actually a corpse that had been sacrificed, and he came back from the dead. Got to the high platform, right? Fan Na nodded. Of course, I remember it very clearly. Then here comes the question, since this sacrifice has already been sacrificed once, why didn't any of the cultists at the scene recognize him? Ordinary cultists are nothing more than ordinary cultists. Why didn't even the priest himself recognize him? Didn't you recognize that the sacrifice in front of you was sacrificed by yourself not long ago? Fan Na slowly frowned. The heretics at the scene watched the sacrifice that was sacrificed not long ago reappear in front of them, but no one noticed the abnormality. Their memories were tampered with, and their cognition distorted. Even we didn't realize this obvious inconsistency at the time, did we? Heidi spread her hands with a wry smile. In fact, I didn't even realize that I was ignoring this natural contradiction until an hour ago. And until now I also know from you that my own spirit has been affected. Fan Na didn't speak for a while. She turned around and came to the cultist who was still in a dazed state. The cultist, who was double hypnotized by a large dose of nerve drugs and powerful incense, just shook his head slightly, looking blankly at the tall lady in front of him. Fan Na suddenly turned her head and asked, these cult members hacked and killed each other after the ceremony went out of control. Is it also because of cognitive confusion? Yes, I saw some flickering pictures in their memory, Heidi replied. These pictures seemed to imprint them very strongly, making them believe that everyone else at the ceremony was killed by evil spirits or similar things, are occupied and controlled, and they don't think that they are killing their compatriots, but that they are expelling the evil spirits from the bodies of other compatriots. This is mostly their soul instincts. Warning, heretics are also believers. After all, there is a dark sun behind them to bless these people. When huge and weird dangers arise, these believers who receive the blessing are extremely, maybe they sensed something. Fan Na analyzed based on experience. Their crazy hallucinations actually revealed the truth to some extent, but unfortunately, these untrained ordinary people didn't know the meaning of these warnings at all, and instead fell into a collective frenzy state. Heidi looked at Fan Na with a serious face, and after hesitating a few times, she finally spoke cautiously. So, what is behind this matter? Is it more evil than that ancient sun? Fan Na thought for a while, then shook her head lightly. It's better not to inquire about it, Heidi. You don't have a deep connection with this matter, but if you learn more about it, I'm afraid some inseparable connections will be established. Well, since even you, the judge, said so, it's more important for me to protect my own life, Heidi said while picking up the medical kit that had been packed. I really want to give myself. I'm on vacation. Don't worry, I'm not running away. There will be an exhibition in the Oceanographic Museum in 2 days. I'm quite interested. Fan Na nodded. Visiting the Maritime Museum is a good way to relax, and the blessings of the goddess are also filled in those exhibits. Heidi smiled, picked up the medical kit, and walked towards the door. But when she was about to open the door to go out, she stopped suddenly and looked back at Fan Na worriedly. I said, the pollution has really subsided. Is it gone? Don't worry, of course it's subsided. Fanna spread her hands helplessly. We just caught up with some remnants. You have stayed in this quiet underground sanctuary for so long, the blessing of the goddess has long the impact is cleaned up. Then I can rest assured. Heidi breathed a sigh of relief and pushed open the door. Then see you next time, Judge Vanna. Fan Na watched MS. Heidi leave the room. Beside her, the sun cultist who was dazed by the powerful incense and nerve potion also stared blankly at Fanna with half-opened eyes. The potions made by modern civilization, the incense passed down from ancient times, the quiet environment of the sanctuary, and the blessing of the sun deeply rooted in the soul, these chaotic forces are entangled and gathered, and produce subtle emotions in the cult members. Influence. Fanna's hazy figure was reflected in the eyes of the cultists. He saw the judge standing in front of him, tall and firm. He saw a vague phantom standing behind Fanna. It was a nearly transparent phantom, and there was still a dark green flame burning around the phantom. This tall phantom stood quietly behind Fanna, with a blank expression on his face. Duncan sat in the chart room expressionlessly, watching the puppet Alice busy in front of him. She brought a large tray with bright tableware and a large bowl of steaming soup. It smelled like fish soup. Apparently, after getting more familiar with the environment on the lost home, the puppet lady came up with a new idea to do something for the captain in her own way. Dinner? Duncan looked at the doll curiously, and watched the other person put the tableware and fish soup in front of him. Why did you suddenly think of making this? I finished cleaning up the ingredients in the kitchen, and then I saw fish in the bucket. Alice smiled proudly. I can't help with many tasks on the ship, but cooking should always be done. Okay, I'll cook for you in the future. It's a good thing to have this kind of heart. Duncan didn't know how to evaluate this weird doll, but faced Alice's sincere smile. No one was embarrassed to refuse. He was just a little curious. But as a puppet, can you cook? I can learn it. It feels quite simple. Alice took it for granted. Just ask Mr. Goathead about the most basic things. He told me a lot about cooking before. Duncan glanced at the goat's head next to him blankly, and then at Alice. A wood carving and a puppet of unknown material. The two can't make up a digestive system together, and they even get together to study cooking. One dares to teach, and the other really dares to listen? He didn't know what mood he should be in. He just picked up the spoon and stirred the fish soup in the bowl, thinking that at least this thing smelled right. But the next second, his movements froze. After a moment of silence, he reached out and fished out a long silver-white hair from the spoon. Your hair fell in. Duncan said blankly. Ah, I didn't drop my hair in it. Alice waved her hands immediately. My head fell in. But don't worry, I fished it out right away without any help. Duncan. Chapter 57 Lower level. This matter was so weird that Duncan couldn't finish the bowl of fish soup in the end. After all, as long as he thought of the doll lady's head rolling up and down in the soup pot, he felt that the style of this dinner was running straight towards the direction of the grudge and final destination. Even if Alice's real style was actually very funny, the fact that her head fell into the pot was a bit too scary. Miss Doll looked a little hurt. She looked at the food that Duncan had put aside and grabbed the lace decoration on the edge of her clothes with both hands. Captain, are you angry? Duncan looked at the puppet exhaustedly and said, if you have any unhappiness on the ship, you can tell me directly. I don't have any. Then try not to go into the kitchen in the future, Duncan said casually. But he soon noticed Alice's increasingly frustrated expression. Finally, he shook his head helplessly and changed the subject. Forget it, your intention is good. In fact, I am very happy. But cooking. If you are not skilled, there will be some accidents. It will be fine once you are familiar with it. Alice immediately stood up. Then I can try it later? Duncan held it in for a long time and finally nodded. Just be careful. He gave it some thought. This cursed doll obviously couldn't stand the current situation of living on the lost homeland. Perhaps she really had some kind of nature that required her to do something on this ship in order to feel at ease. But she was an independent individual with thoughts and personality. Duncan felt that he couldn't always treat this doll by attacking her. In comparison, it would be better to let Alice help in the kitchen than to let her continue to fight with cables, anchor ropes and shells. At least the pots and pans on the lost hometown were relatively good-tempered. He lowered his head to glance at the fish soup next to him. To be fair, the taste of the fish soup was actually quite normal. Although the seasonings on the boat were limited, there was no problem with the cooking time. And as a puppet, without a sense of taste or a digestive system, Alice could achieve this level just by listening to a few theoretical knowledge, and this theoretical knowledge came from a goat head who also didn't eat human food. It was actually quite amazing. Two guys who don't eat human food can come together to make a meal that humans can eat. What else can you ask for? Duncan thinks that as long as this puppet is careful in the future, it should still be able to do the work in the kitchen. At least he, the captain, won't have to cook by himself in the future. Then, Captain, do you want me to make something else for you? Alice's voice came from the side, interrupting Duncan's thoughts. I also learned how to grill and fry fish fillets from Mr. Goat Head. I'm not hungry. Duncan shook his head. His body didn't have a strong demand for food. He only ate 3 meals a day to maintain his human habits. At this time, a bowl of Alice's soup had already killed his appetite for half a day. He simply stood up from the table and said, I'm going to walk around the cabin. You want to go to the cabin? Alice was stunned for a moment, and then her expression became a little nervous as if she remembered something. Then can you go and take a look down there? Down there? Duncan frowned. It's the deeper cabins, the places I'm not allowed to go to, said Alice. I keep hearing creaking noises down there, and sometimes it sounds like someone is mumbling under the floor. Would you like to go and have a look? Is there anything going on down there? Looking at the slightly nervous expression on the doll lady's face, Duncan's heart suddenly began to lift. The depths of the lost homeland, that was a place he had never explored yet. Because the deepest part gave him a very strange and dangerous feeling, and at that time he had not yet taken the helm and had not mastered the power of the spiritual fire, so his previous explorations had stopped at the place leading to the deep cabin. Of course, he had plans for further exploration in the future, but now it seems that the plan obviously cannot keep up with the changes. At this moment, Goat Head's voice suddenly came from the side. It sounds like there's some unrest in the cabin, Captain. Do you want to go down and take a look? Before Duncan opened his mouth, he heard the goat head muttering to himself. Come to think of it, you really haven't checked down there for a long time. The cabin needs some comfort from the captain. You know, it has been immersed in the vast sea for a long time. Do you want to take your lantern with you? It's still in the old place, just behind the door. You have been active on the upper deck all this time, and the guys on the lower deck are very noisy. You don't know how annoying they are. Alas, I love quietness and can't stand those creaking sounds in the middle of the night. Duncan looked at Goathead silently, and the latter suddenly became quiet. To be honest, after hearing some of the things that Goathead was muttering, he suddenly felt more resistant to the strange bottom of the cabin. It sounded like it was obviously affected by the deeper impact of the infinite sea, and had become a structure that was considered wrong even on the lost homeland. But the conflicting thought only lingered in my mind for less than a second. Sooner or later he would have to conduct further exploration of other structures of the lost homeland, and it was better to do it sooner rather than later. Reason told him that the sooner the better. The lost homeland was huge, not only in its astonishing length, but also in its many layers deep within the cabin. Currently, Duncan only knew about the ship's superstructure, including the deck area, the upper cabin and ammunition depot and artillery area below the deck, as well as the warehouse, freshwater tank and part of the crew room on the next level. Based on his previous explorations, he could fully imagine how huge structures were hidden in the darkness beneath these areas. Those structures are located below the waterline and, judging by their depth, they are completely immersed in the vast ocean. Dark, eerie, and filled with the sound of hollow wind or howling. The deeper you go into the ship, the more eerie the environment becomes. Duncan didn't know his ship. It would be no use dragging it along in this situation. He is already the captain of this ship. The lost homeland is his home and the base for his activities in this world. He cannot be so ignorant of his own basic situation, even if it is just to survive for a long time in the vast ocean full of anomalies and visions. He must understand the potential and dangers of the lost homeland clearly. God knows whether a crisis will come tomorrow. God knows whether the lost homeland will collide with those offspring in the deep sea or the collapsed border of reality in the next second. What's more, Goathead just mentioned that the bottom of the cabin needs the captain's comfort. The captain hasn't been to the lower cabin for too long. If this continues, it seems that something bad will happen. Duncan got up and went behind the door to find the lantern that Goathead had mentioned. This was a rather old lantern, with a copper frame in the shape of a hexagonal prism that was wide at the top and narrow at the bottom. The glass lampshade was embedded in the copper frame, appearing a bit blurry, but Duncan did not see any wick-like structure inside the lampshade. He showed no curiosity, nor did he ask the goat-headed creature. After a brief and calm thought, he tried to activate the green spiritual fire and infuse this power into the lantern. A cluster of bright green flames immediately jumped and burned inside the lampshade, and this quaint old lantern began to emit a constant glow. In the place where the lantern was shining, a desolate atmosphere spread for some reason, but Duncan felt an inexplicable sense of calm and control as he stood in the light. He seemed to be able to vaguely feel his own power spreading with the light. Wherever the light shone, the details of all things were clearly reflected in his mind. The pigeon AI suddenly flew over and landed on Duncan's shoulder. It had already transformed into the illusory form of an undead bird with flesh and bones. Although Duncan did not actively activate the pigeon, it still passively completed the transformation under the illumination of the lantern. Duncan glanced down at the lantern in his hand and thought it might be a good thing. It seemed that it could spread its power to the surrounding environment with minimal loss and maintain a force field. This force field had the functions of detection, warning, and even control. This feature was obviously quite suitable for long-term exploration in unfamiliar or dangerous areas. "Captain, can I go with you?" Duncan turned around and saw Alice standing behind him. She was looking at the lantern curiously with an eager expression on her face. "I haven't been to the lower level yet. Mr. Go-Head said that I can't go down without your permission." Duncan thought about it and nodded slightly. Okay. He didn't know what was in the lower level of the cabin, but it was part of the lost homeland anyway. As he had successfully taken the helm, there shouldn't be much danger in the cabin. Bringing this puppet with him might be able to lend a hand. The goat head left on the navigation table did not express any opinion. Apparently, from its perspective, it was quite normal for the captain to inspect the lost homeland, and the same was true for bringing a helper with him. Outside the cabin, night has gradually fallen. The cold glow of the creation of the world is shining on the sea and the empty deck of the ghost ship. The translucent spirit sails are fluttering in the air, slowly adjusting their angles without any human control. Holding a lantern, carrying his sword and flintlock, Duncan and Alice crossed the empty deck, passed through the top two cabins, and walked down the wooden stairs to the depths of the lost homeland. The staircase at the end of the sailor's cabin is where Duncan's previous exploration ended. A strange darkness lingered around the downward sloping staircase, and in the darkness only the pillars supporting the cabin and some wall structures could be vaguely seen. "It's so dark down here." Alice stood at the stairs looking at the dim environment below a little nervously. "Is there no light down here?" "There are oil lamps that are always on in other places." "No, there is light down there," Duncan said slowly, holding the lantern. With the power of the lantern spreading, he could finally see the situation under the cabin more clearly than before, but the light down there is black. "Ah?" Alice was stunned for a moment, and didn't react for a long time. "There is also black light?" Duncan did not respond for a moment, but walked slowly down with the lantern in hand. It was not until Alice caught up that he spoke softly. "After all, we are already below the surface of the infinite sea." Chapter 58. Cowardly Alice. The captain's words were like the cold night wind, passing through the darker and darker stairs. Alice folded her arms subconsciously and followed Duncan even closer, and as she went down, she finally saw what the captain said. "What does the light is black mean?" There were indeed lights in the lower cabin, at least in terms of structure and layout. The cabin she saw also had the same support columns as the one above, and on the support columns were hung oil lamps that would not go out, and those oil lamps were burning. But instead, the burning flame made the area near the oil lamp appear darker than that in the distance. Yes, the closer to the oil lamp, the dimmer the light. The oil lamp itself is almost shrouded in a shadow, and only a few outlines can be seen vaguely, while the farther away from the oil lamp, the light gradually increases. In the corner of the cabin, the brightness is even close to that of the upper cabin. From the stairs, it felt very dark down here, precisely because there are two lights hanging on both sides of the stairs below. From the visual effect, it seems that these lights are actively releasing darkness, neutralizing and annihilating the cabin. "Nakamoto is as bright as it is." Alice stared at the overall dark cabin, and it took a long time before she muttered, This reasonable? This you are an unreasonable puppet telling me to talk about rationality here?" Duncan glanced at Alice, who was visibly nervous. Under the sea level of the boundless sea, the rationality of things is the most unreasonable place. When he said this, his expression was quite indifferent, as if this evil situation was something he was used to. But in fact, his reaction in his heart was exactly the same as Alice's. Even the undead pigeon on his shoulder suddenly flapped its wings. Said the voice of the heart. "Is it like a word?" "Is it like a word?" Duncan ignored the noise of the pigeons on his shoulders, but carefully observed the cabin he had never set foot in before. and at the same time adjusted the angle of the lantern in his hand, trying to understand the environment here through the changes of light and shadow. Below the waterline on the lost home, the lights in the cabin are inverted. The lamps seem not to emit light, but to absorb the original light in the space, as if some kind of world mirror image. However, the light from the spirit body released by the lantern in Duncan's hand follows the normal lighting law. The surrounding area of the lantern is very bright, and the farther away it gets darker. Is there any rationale behind this? Is this just the influence of the boundless sea, or is it mixed with the characteristics of the lost homeland itself? Is the bright environment in the cabin itself real? If those light-absorbing oil lamps were extinguished, would this be a bright place? For a moment, this bold idea really popped up in Duncan's mind. He was really thinking about what would happen when the oil lamp on this floor was turned off, but in the next moment, he forcibly grabbed the obvious bad thoughts. He couldn't turn off the lights here even if it seemed that these lights were causing the entire cabin to go dark. There must be a reason for them to be lit here. It suddenly occurred to him that in the Pulan city-state, the information he had received was that burning flames can disperse strange dangers. In this statement, it was the flame itself that had the effect, not the light emitted by the flames. Does this mean that under certain circumstances, the light and darkness in this world will appear reversed, and under this reversed condition, the only thing worthy of belief is the flame itself? Does this also indirectly explain why the light emitted by the electric lamp has no exorcism effect because it is just light, which lacks the element of flame? Captain? Alice's voice suddenly came from the side, and Miss Dull's voice was nervous and concerned. Is there anything unusual here? Nothing unusual, Duncan replied calmly with his expression unchanged, while walking forward slowly. The light-absorbing oil lamps were burning quietly on the support posts on both sides, and there were some scattered ropes piled up around the posts. When Duncan walked among them, the oil lamps hanging on the posts cracked slightly. With a sound, the rope on the ground slowly wriggled and retreated, making way for the captain. For some reason, a sentence suddenly appeared in Duncan's mind. Light and shadow are illusions brought about by the deep sea. Under the sea level that is no longer credible, only the flame itself is still loyally guarding the wealth of the lost home. He looked at the quietly burning lights and nodded slightly, as if to express his approval and gratitude. So in the next second, all the oil lamps in the entire cabin became vigorous with a degree visible to the naked eye, and flames shot up under the glass lampshades one by one. The whole cabin is getting darker. Duncan, he suddenly regretted boasting too early, and he should have waited until he was ready to return to these oil lamps. Alice followed. The puppet carefully observed the surrounding situation. She saw large wooden barrels and some crates piled up in the corner of the cabin, as well as some closed rooms and corridors leading to nowhere. She whispered. He muttered, "This seems to be a warehouse too. Could this have been a cargo ship? If it's a cargo ship, the cargo won't be placed in such a deep place. There is a concept called handling costs." Duncan shook his head and said casually, "These are ocean-going supplies for the lost home itself during its long-term voyage." Consumed. Alice blinked. Ocean sea supplies? Duncan didn't say a word, but stepped forward to check some of the goods closest to him. Some of the wooden barrels are filled with some kind of fat, dark brown and viscous in texture, but not too strong. It may be some kind of fuel, but it has obviously been piled up here for a long time. Duncan even suspects that these fuels were changed in the lost homeland. The inventory before becoming a ghost ship, they may have been used for lighting and exorcism, but after this ship became a ghost ship, many things in the cargo hold were useless like this. In another part of the barrel, Duncan saw something familiar. Cheese that is older than him, bacon that can crack mountains. Duncan silently resealed the lid. On this floor, material reserves are piled up in most places. Although a considerable part of them seems to be useless on today's ghost ships, it is enough to prove his previous judgment on the lost homeland. This ship, at least initially built for some kind of ocean-going expedition, is capable of carrying a large amount of supplies, and there are tight security measures between the various supply holds to prevent the spread of fire or the loss of insects and rats. Supplies. Reminiscent of the large number of artillery and large ammunition depots on the upper deck of this ship, he can almost guess what kind of ambitious exploration dream this ship once carried at the beginning. That is the most distant route, and the most dangerous. The voyage of the voyage has to face the most dangerous environment and the most dangerous enemies, and such a voyage of exploration requires a whole ship of loyal and excellent sailors and a steadfast captain to complete. But now, this exploration plan that may have existed has disappeared with the wind, and the ambitious lost homeland has become the most terrifying natural disaster on the vast sea, and the sailors have disappeared. Only a ghost captain, still in control this ghost ship that lost its target. He and Alice continued to walk forward and entered a corridor after crossing several independent warehouses. If the structure of this floor corresponds to the upper floor, then the stairs leading to the lower floor should be in the depths of the corridor. I feel. More and more gloomy. Miss Dahl crossed her arms, looked around cautiously and whispered, "Did you hear the wind? Why is there wind in the cabin?" "I heard it, don't be nervous, it's normal," Duncan said casually and then glanced at the doll again. "Why are you so timid? At least you have the name Abnormal 99, don't you?" As he spoke, he also thought of the information he had received from Nina before. In this world, there are many lists of abnormalities and anomalies that are open to the public, and these lists help people avoid dangers that may be encountered in daily life or timely identification of signs of certain anomalies out of control. But this list is not complete, and only the part of anomalies and anomalies that are closer to the general public due to controlled threats or special nature are open to the public. However, the anomalies and visions that ordinary people have no chance to encounter in their lives are obviously not among them. He tried to find out about abnormalities 99 from Nina, but the girl never saw this number in the textbook. This shows that Alice, the cursed doll, either has a special secret that has been blocked by the authorities and the church, or she is so dangerous that she has always been strictly isolated from civilized society. Therefore, there will be no interaction with ordinary people at all. No matter what the reason is, it is enough to make this lady doll look a little more mysterious in Duncan's eyes. But this mysterious puppet just shrank its neck after hearing Duncan's words, with a nervous expression on its face. "It doesn't mean that you can grow up if you have a number and courage. I am Abnormal 099, and I am not Courageous 099." Duncan sighed, thinking that the thing in front of him might not be the most embarrassing anomaly in the world, and it's thanks to the sailors who escorted her before that they were so nervous. Chapter 59 Bilge Duncan has always been curious about what is so special and dangerous about this gothic doll who calls herself Alice that makes the sailors escorting her so nervous, and why she can occupy the name of Anomaly 099 in this world where dangerous and strange things emerge one after another. Admittedly, a puppet that can move on its own and has reason is indeed very weird. The scenes of her occasionally running around with her head in her arms or acting separately are also really scary. However, in Duncan's opinion, this weirdness is far from enough to meet the standard of obtaining a higher number. The simplest comparison is the information he learned from Nina. Anomaly 196 Blood, a dangerous anomaly contained and sealed in the underground sanctuary of Plant Church. Its main body is blood equivalent to the total blood volume of an adult male. This anomaly has certain thinking characteristics and will flow and spread on its own. It will actively try to replace the blood in the body of a nearby host that meets the conditions and occupy the body to escape. The way to prevent it from flowing and spreading is to store it in 22 blood tanks and keep it frozen, but if someone bleeds within 10 meters of the storage point, the seal will immediately fail, and the blood in the bleeding person's body will be replaced by Anomaly 196, and the host's own sanity will also be taken over. This anomaly ignores the saint's countermeasures and will unconditionally kill the host that meets the requirements. As one of the most dangerous anomalies managed by the planned city-state, the information related to Anomaly 196 Blood is always open to the public to ensure that once the anomaly is leaked to the city, the authorities can quickly locate it and take measures to deal with it. Duncan didn't know what the so-called saint meant, but from the name he could tell that it should correspond to some very powerful level of extraordinary being. Perhaps the Inquisitor Vanna who had appeared in the newspaper was a saint, and how many saints like her could possibly fight against Anomaly 196 in the entire planned city-state? This was only Anomaly 196, something ranked nearly 200 out of 100. Alice's number was Anomaly 099. Within hundreds. Although according to Nina, there is some uncertainty in the numbering of anomalies and phenomena, and different anomalies and phenomena cannot always be clearly contrasted in strength, but in general, the anomalies and phenomena that are ranked higher are usually more dangerous, or have more bizarre and difficult to control characteristics, or they have caused shocking damage or contributed to special historical events, and thus firmly occupy unique high-level numbers in a way that leaves a name in history. In any case, numbers within the 100th digit mean extremely difficult and dangerous characteristics to the civilized world, or they have done something amazing in history. But this cursed doll named Alice. Duncan turned around and glanced at Alice, who was following him obediently. Alice noticed the captain's gaze and immediately raised her head, giving him a harmless yet slightly cowardly smile. It's unlikely to expect this guy to figure out how dangerous he is on his own. We'll have to look for clues in the historical archives of the planned city-state. But how could an antique shop owner who lived in the downtown area get access to such confidential information? The antique industry connections left by the cultist Ron were obviously impossible, as most of the items in the shop were no older than last week. Duncan pondered silently without stopping. The dark green spiritual fire burned quietly in the lantern in his hand, gradually spreading to the deeper parts of the cabin. The ambient light that was in an inverted state due to the strange environment at the bottom of the cabin mixed with the light of the lantern, presenting a strange and even dizzying state of light and shadow. To outsiders, this scene is probably extremely weird, eerie, and terrifying. However, Duncan felt a faint sense of calm in his heart. His strength was immersed in the light of the lantern, like a trickle of water seeping into the depths of the cabin that had been closed for who knows how many years. The bottom structure of the cabin, which was completely unknown to him before, was becoming clearer in his mind bit by bit, and he felt a subtle touch the last area on the lost homeland that was not under the captain's control was getting back on track. Duncan could feel more and more clearly that as he explored, the subtle restlessness of various things in the cabin around him was gradually calming down. It was indeed as Goat had said. The cabin bottom of the lost homeland had some movements due to being immersed in the vast ocean for a long time, but as long as the captain came down in person to calm people down, order on the ship would gradually be restored. You really are afraid of the seabed. You're so scared even if you just come to the cabin below the sea level, Duncan suddenly said to Alice who was following him. Then why do you have to follow me? I didn't think so much at the time. Alice forced herself to remain calm. I thought that no matter how we walked, we were still on the ship. I didn't have the concept of cabin below the waterline. I'm just a puppet. You don't even have a digestive tract, and you're still studying cooking. Don't use the puppet as an excuse, Duncan said casually. You need to make up for your knowledge on the ship in the future. Alice sighed in frustration, and Duncan was silent for a moment before asking curiously, why are you so afraid of the deep sea? Or, why are you so afraid of soaking in the sea? I know the deep sea is dangerous and many people are afraid of it. You've said this before, but now it seems your nervousness is more serious than I thought. It's to the point where you become nervous even if you're just standing in a cabin below the waterline and thinking about the sea water outside. Don't pull at the lace on your clothes. There's no replacement clothes for you on the lost homeland. If they break, you'll have to sew them yourself. Oh, Alice quickly relaxed her hands a little, but then she pulled the buttons unconsciously again. I haven't thought about this problem at all. I'm just afraid. Is it okay to be afraid? Hearing Miss Doll's nervous tone, Duncan remained silent. He looked to the end of the corridor and saw a staircase sloping downwards appearing in his sight. It was deeper still, perhaps down to the bilge, the point where the ship was most in contact with the endless sea. Duncan and Alice stood at the stairs and looked down. With the light emitted by the spiritual fire lantern, they did not see the cabin structure below, but a door standing in the depths of darkness. When he saw the door, Duncan couldn't help but frown. The structure here is actually not quite normal. First of all, the road leading to the bottom of the cabin seems too long. The stairs between the cabins on the upper floor are actually continuous, and you can quickly reach the cabins on each floor. But on this floor, the stairs leading to the depths are located at the end of the corridor, and you need to pass through almost an entire floor of the warehouse area to get there, which will undoubtedly affect the travel efficiency within the ship. Secondly, there was an extra door under the stairs. Duncan hesitated for a moment, then picked up the lantern and walked slowly down. Alice hesitated even more, but finally followed obediently. She would never dare to return to the upper level by herself now, and it would be safer for her to follow behind the captain. Soon Duncan arrived in front of the door. He raised the lantern to illuminate the surroundings, trying to find out if there were any words around the door. Then, as expected, a line of letters on the door frame appeared in his sight. The last door in the bilge. What does this mean? Alice looked at the letters on the door frame curiously. The last door in the cabin. Normally, shouldn't the function of the room be written on the doorplate? Obviously it's a reminder, Duncan said thoughtfully, looking away from the door frame. He placed one hand on the door handle and reminded the puppet beside him before pushing the door open, if you find other doors after you go in, don't touch them. Alice nodded nervously, and then saw Duncan push open the last door in the cabin. A strange pale light came towards me. They stepped forward and into an open area. After seeing the situation on the other side of the door clearly, Alice's eyes widened instantly. This she mumbled for a long time before finally uttering, "Ship captain, the bottom of the boat is broken. It's broken," she shouted loudly, but Duncan did not respond for a while because the latter was also staring at the situation around him in amazement. The deepest part of the lost homeland, the bottom structure immersed in the boundless ocean, shattered. What comes into view is a completely torn apart cabin, with countless huge cracks and dim luminous holes. Hundreds of cabin fragments are scattered and floating in the space, yet maintaining a certain fragmented orderliness and the proper outline and structure of the cabin bottom. Through the huge cracks between the countless fragments, Duncan could clearly see the scenery outside the cabin. It was not the deep, dark, boundless sea he had imagined, but a pale, dim void, and countless dim lights and shadows speeding through the void. Chapter 60. This door leads to the lost homeland. Duncan and Alice stood at the end of the stairs leading to the bilge, and what they saw was a strange and horrifying scene. The entire bottom of the lost homeland was in a fragmented state, and outside the shattered cabin, it was clearly a kind of nothingness permeated with endless dim gleams. Is this the real build structure of the lost home? Then what is beyond this fragmented cabin? Will such a scene exist under the sea level of the boundless sea? Duncan cautiously took 2 steps forward and came to the shattered cabin. He stepped on the largest piece of wood and looked back to the direction he came from. The last door still stands quietly on the spot, fixed on a floating plank. Behind the door is a dark staircase, which leads to the top obliquely, but around the door, there is nothing that should exist. There is nothing but an empty wall. This door is floating alone in this space. Duncan cautiously walked around behind the door and found that there was nothing behind it. Through the open door, he could directly see the broken cabin on the opposite side. Captain Alice's nervous voice came over. The puppet looked around in fear, and finally its gaze fell on Duncan again. This is normal, right? In fact, Duncan has more confidence than this puppet. After all, the latter can blindly trust the captain. Where can he find confidence as a captain at this time? However, looking at Alice's nervous appearance, and thinking of the crew rules that Goat's Head once said, Duncan still forcibly controlled his uneasiness and maintained his usual serious and calm appearance. Don't worry, he said lightly, the lost home is a ship you can't even imagine. Indeed, it's really unimaginable, Alice said in amazement. Duncan's calm performance obviously reassured her a little, and she began to look curiously at the broken holes and the chaotic light and shadow outside the hull. Captain, what's going on outside? Doesn't look like there's water? Duncan thought for a while, and suddenly looked at Alice curiously. Do you think this is below the surface of the boundless sea? Alice was taken aback. Ah? Why did you ask me? Duncan said indifferently, because you have experience. Isn't that thrown by you? Alice subconsciously said, but quickly swallowed it halfway through and began to answer honestly. I don't think so. The sea must be full of water. Even if the boundless sea something is wrong, there must be water under the sea level, but it looks like a void filled with chaotic streams of light. Duncan shook his head and walked slowly forward. He came to the edge of the wooden fragments under his feet and looked down at the flowing light and shadow outside the cabin. The bottom of the lost country, not in the boundless sea. Alice was taken aback. Ah? Then where is this? Duncan didn't speak, looking inscrutable in fact, because he didn't know either. But he still has a vague guess. Perhaps this ship is actually sailing in several different dimensions at the same time? Exclamation on the surface. It seems that the lost homeland is sailing in the boundless sea of the real world, but in fact, different parts of the ship belong to different dimensions. This also explains why the deeper you go into the lost home, the more eerie the surrounding cabins appear. Perhaps it is not the cabin itself that is eerie. So if the dark and chaotic space outside the cabin is not the boundless sea, what is it? It doesn't look like the spirit world, nor does it look like the dark space seen when performing the spirit world shuttle. Could it be a deeper place? Secluded? Subspace? With countless guesses and hypotheses in his heart, Duncan slowly reached out and pulled out the pirate sword at his waist. Then, holding a lantern in one hand and a long sword in the other, he slowly leaned towards the edge of the fragment under his feet. At this moment he was very cautious, even though the gap between these fragments seemed to be able to be jumped over in one step. He did not step rashly, but first tried it with his long sword. God knows if something will pop out of these cracks and swallow anyone who hastily crossed them. The next second, he opened his eyes slightly in surprise. He saw that the tip of the long sword disappeared, but on the edge of the fragments opposite the crack, a section of the tip of the sword suddenly emerged. Duncan frowned and tested in a different direction, and a similar phenomenon happened again. He finally understood slowly. These seemingly cracked areas are actually still spatially continuous. The seemingly fragmented build structure is actually still intact. He straightened up, looked around the cracks and the light and shadow flowing outside the cracks, and realized in his heart, these fractures were just optical results, but did not affect the continuity of space. It didn't break here, but for some reason, the picture outside the hull appeared inside the hull. But what causes this? Is it spatial overlap? Or is it the wrong projection from high dimension to low dimension? Duncan subconsciously mobilized all the reliable or unreliable knowledge in his mind, trying to explain the weird phenomenon here, while Alice watched the captain make some strange moves on the edge of the crack with a confused face, and then used a lantern to go around. After looking at it for a while, I finally couldn't help but say, Captain, are you using a special pacification ceremony to pacify the cabin? With his back to Alice, Duncan silently put away his long sword, biting the bullet. Yes. Oh, that's amazing. Alice's eyes lit up immediately. Then do you want to perform a pacification ceremony for all the fragments here? That's enough, Duncan said with a stern face and quickly diverted her attention before the curious puppet continued, let's move on. As he spoke, he cautiously stepped forward with a lantern in his hand. When he took this step, he almost tensed up all the muscles and nerves in his body, and was always on guard against any unexpected situation when he crossed the crack. But what happened? Nothing happened. Just like the previous test with the long sword, he directly jumped the process of crossing the crack, just like walking in a normal cabin, and walked directly to the opposite fragment. Alice watched in amazement as the captain walked ahead, passing through as if ignoring the cracks under her feet, and followed up in a similar manner, but she still became nervous when crossing the cracks, and finally couldn't help speeding up and jumping forward. Then, of course, he slammed into Duncan in front of him. Duncan felt the wind behind him suddenly, and then something hit his back firmly, and suddenly turned around subconsciously and raised his hand. In the next second, he looked expressionlessly at the headless puppet behind him, while Alice's head was rolling and stammering more than 10 meters away. Yes. Right, you wait here honestly, I'll pick it up for you, Duncan sighed, thinking in his heart why he brought this useless doll down while quickly catching up to Alice's head that had been rolling away. Picked it up with ease. Do you want to consider putting a screw in your neck? Alice's head didn't seem to hear Duncan's complaints in the second half of the sentence. She just suddenly opened her eyes wide and looked in a certain direction. There is a fan. Duncan frowned, and turned his head to look in the direction Alice's head was trying to signal with his eyes. A dark wooden door stood silently on the fragment at the end. A door. There is still a door, and there is still a door. When Duncan saw the notice on the door at the end of the stairs before, he wondered if this classic situation would happen, but when he saw that there was indeed an extra door in the bilge space, he still couldn't help it. Hold on. At this time, Alice's body also stumbled over, and Duncan returned the doll's head to her while looking at the door. Is there such a door over there just now? Alice stuffed her head back on her neck with a bore, and glanced over there while moving her cervical spine. It doesn't seem to be there. It only appeared after we walked over. Duncan hummed non-committally and walked cautiously towards the door with a lantern in his hand. In fact, in this weird cabin, he no longer needs the lighting of the lantern. Although the chaotic light seeping in from the cracks is dim, it is enough to maintain the basic brightness of the whole space, but he still maintains the light in his hand. Lanterns. This is a necessary prudence. Although the goat's head hadn't reminded him about this, Duncan had already decided that as long as he was still in the cabin below the waterline, he would never turn off the light. The new door looked unremarkable. The black door panel was not much different from the last door at the end of the stairs before, and it also had a similar style and material to the doors used in most cabins on the Lost Country. Duncan raised his head, and above the door frame of this door, he saw a line of letters that seemed to be cast in copper. This door leads to the Lost Country. Chapter 61. Opposite the door. This gate leads to the Lost Hometown. The letters on the door frame are cast in brass, and look as if they have been through a century. Under the illumination of the spiritual fire lanterns and the chaotic dim light that permeates the entire cabin, every line on the letters seems to be coated with a layer of solidified time, exuding an ancient and mysterious flavor. Duncan stared at the line of letters for several seconds, then turned away expressionlessly. Alice's voice suddenly came from the side. Hey? Captain, are we leaving now? Don't we need to check this door? We don't even have to open it. There's nothing more to see. This is the end of the cabin, Duncan said casually. But just then, a slight knocking sound suddenly came, which made him stop. Duncan turned around and looked at Alice, who was behind him. Alice looked around nervously for a while, and finally turned to look at the dark, wooden door. The sound seems to come from behind this door. Duncan stopped where he was, staring seriously at the wooden door from which there was a sudden knock. He waited patiently for several seconds, and suddenly heard two more knocks. The knocks were faint and vague, as if there was an extremely thick curtain between them, as if the door was wrapped in an invisible thing. But it was definitely not an illusion. After a brief but intense deliberation, he finally returned to the door, and Alice followed him over, nervously paying attention to what might happen next. Duncan held the lantern in one hand, and the sword in the other, carefully observing the dark wooden door in front of him. At this moment, he suddenly realized that the door was not completely closed. On the side of the door, he could see a gap of about 1 centimeter. The door was ajar, as if someone had left in a hurry and forgotten to close it, or as if something inside had deliberately left a crack in the door to attract the blind visitor. Duncan picked up the lantern and shone it carefully inside, observing the situation on the other side of the door through the crack in the door, but his other hand had already placed his sword against the crack in the door, ready to stab anything that came out from inside. However, he never expected what he would see. Opposite the crack in the door is a room. It was a small room that looked like it had been there for quite some time. The wallpaper on the wall was dull and wrinkled, and the slightly messy furnishings seemed to have not been tidied up for a long time. Facing the door, one could see a single bed, and next to the bed was a table with a computer, books, and a small ornament on it. A tall and thin figure was writing quickly at a desk. He was wearing a white shirt bought from an ordinary street stall. His hair was messy and unkempt, and he looked a little thin as he obviously didn't exercise much. Duncan's gaze pierced through the crack in the door, staring at everything familiar over there, at that room, at the figure writing furiously at the desk. And that figure seemed to suddenly sense something. He stopped writing, looked up abruptly, stood up and ran towards the door. The figure ran over and stared outside through the crack in the door, staring at Duncan. Duncan was staring at him too, at the familiar face. It was his own face. After staring at each other for a few seconds, the figure opposite the door suddenly became excited. He began to push the door hard, as if he wanted to get out, but the door did not move at all, as if it was cast into space. So he began to try to break the door lock and pry open the door with tools. He slammed the motionless door hard, as if he was trying every way to escape, but to no avail. The person inside the door finally gave up this futile attempt. He patted hard near the crack of the door and shouted something loudly through the door. However, only some vague and ethereal noises could be heard from outside the door, and not a single word could be heard clearly. Duncan looked at all this in shock and confusion. Looking at the self trapped in the room, he knew what the person inside the door wanted to do. His eyes slowly fell on the door handle next to him. The door handle was within reach. From here, the door might be opened very easily. However, he just looked at the handle and did not take any further action. The man trapped in the room seemed to be frustrated. He finally shouted towards the door, but when he found that his voice could not be heard outside the door at all, he ran back to the desk, bent down and quickly wrote something on a piece of paper, then ran back quickly and showed the paper to Duncan. Through the crack in the door, Duncan saw a string of scribbled words on the paper. "Help me. I'm trapped in this room. Neither the window nor the door can be opened." Duncan suddenly laughed. His smile fell through the gap into the eyes of Zhu Ming, who was trapped in the room. The latter finally slowly opened his eyes, as if he was stunned and as if he was gradually getting angry because of the mockery. The next second, the pirate sword in Duncan's hand suddenly stretched forward, passed through the narrow gap in the door, and directly pierced into the body of Zhu Ming on the opposite side of the door. The latter was pierced by the sword and opened his mouth as if to scream. Indistinctly, a series of hoarse and noisy noises seemed to reach Duncan's ears, but Duncan was not moved at all. He just gripped the hilt of the sword more forcefully and stabbed forward, approaching the door, and whispered, "You don't have to write Chinese if you can't." Aye aye. The pigeon that had been silent all the way suddenly flapped its wings and uttered a hoarse voice. "This is an illusion. What are you hiding?" The next second, the figure opposite the door suddenly began to melt like a wax figure and quickly dissipated in the distorted light and shadow. The room that looked so real and so familiar also quickly lost its disguise, revealing its true face in Duncan's eyes. A dim, old cabin, empty, sealed in time and solidified ruin. The sword in his hand felt empty, as if it had pierced only air from the very beginning. Just a cabin across from this extra door? Duncan observed the situation on the other side of the door in surprise, but no matter how he looked at it this time, it seemed to be just an ordinary cabin. But is that cabin really real? Duncan slowly retracted the sword that was poking through the crack in the door, breathed a sigh of relief, and took a half step back. The strange thing he just encountered was still deeply imprinted in his mind. He didn't know whether it was a simple illusion or something else, but one thing was certain. This door was definitely weird and dangerous beyond his imagination. If the illusion reflected on the other side of the door was based on his own distorted memory and cognition, then it meant that the danger on the other side of the door had exceeded the power of Captain Duncan himself. If it was not an illusion generated based on his own cognition and memory, but a set fabricated by something, the situation would be even worse. Because no one in this world should know what that room looks like, and no one should know the existence of the individual Zhu Ming. But the thing on the other side of the door knows. He took a deep breath. My caution just now was correct. No matter what, I cannot open this door. At the same time, he felt a little scared because there really was a moment just now when he was looking at the door handle. This thought came into his mind, to open the door and let himself out. Captain Ellis's voice suddenly came, waking Duncan from his thoughts. He looked up at the puppet and saw its concerned and frightened expression. Captain, are you okay? What's in that door? Why do you look so serious? Duncan shook his head. Nothing. Behind this door is not the place you should look. We have already reached the bottom of the cabin. We can go back now. As he spoke, he reached out and tried to push the door to see if he could close it. The gap in the door is really disturbing. But the door did not move at all even though he had exerted great strength. The door still seemed to be solid as if it was integrated into the space. Like the boarded-up windows in his bachelor pad. Duncan withdrew his hand thoughtfully. The door wouldn't close, but he wouldn't try to open it any further. Okay. Alice didn't care about the captain's attempts to close the door. She was stunned for a moment, but quickly reacted with a happy expression on her face. Then let's go back quickly. To be honest, this place is quite weird. I'm a little nervous again. Duncan hummed noncommittally, took Alice and turned to walk towards the last door that led to the stairs. This place was so weird that even he didn't want to stay there any longer. After this, no further unusual events occurred. They successfully passed through the shattered bottom of the ship, through the cargo hold with inverted lights, through the dark stairs and corridors, and returned to the cabin above the waterline. The moment she returned to the normal cabin, Alice felt her whole body suddenly relaxed, as if some previously imperceptible shadow that had been entangled with her had been dispelled. She saw that the lights around her had returned to their original state, and the cabin was no longer gloomy and depressing. As for Captain Duncan next to her, the captain looked no different from before. He didn't seem to feel depressed before, nor did he feel extra relaxed now. The environment deep inside the lost homeland had no effect on him. But when he came back, the captain was obviously very silent and seemed to be worried about something. "Captain, are you tired?" Alice asked cautiously. "Do you want me to make you something to eat? You didn't even have a good dinner." Duncan stopped thinking and looked at the puppet beside him. On the doll lady's face, there was a genuine expression of concern just like Nina's. He suddenly relaxed, and the haze in his heart seemed to fade away quietly. "Don't drop anything weird into the pot this time. My head isn't some weird thing. Especially your head." "Oh." Chapter 62 Unstable Navigation. Duncan took Alice back to the upper deck of the lost home. The cold world creation still hung high in the night. Duncan thought he had been exploring inside the ship for a long time, and even suspected that the night had passed, but now, looking at the deep night, it seemed that he had only stayed below for a few hours. But just the strange and unusual situation he saw in the past few hours was enough to impress him. He still remembers the cabin where the light and shadow are reversed, and the door at the bottom of the cabin. Especially that door. What is behind that door? The lantern in Duncan's hand has been extinguished, and he and the puppet walked slowly towards the captain's cabin. Neither of them said much. The puppet seemed to have started to rehearse cooking in its head, while Duncan's attention fell on surrounding deck buildings. He compared his memory and confirmed that the dark and dilapidated cabin opposite the door was indeed a part of the lost country. The styles of the two were exactly the same, and there was a vague continuity in the architectural structure. And recalling it now, he always felt that there seemed to be something else in the deepest part of that dilapidated cabin, hidden in the darkness. That was the unknown hidden snow area of the lost homeland, a hidden snow area that even Captain Duncan couldn't perceive or detect. Does Goat Head know that door? Does it know what's behind that? Should I ask it myself? The captain's cabin arrived, but Duncan's thoughts were still fluctuating. He took Alice to open the door and went in. He saw the goat's head was still quietly sitting on the nautical table, and his empty and dark eyes were turning to the direction of the door following the sound. Duncan turned around to hang up the lantern, and then heard Alice greet Goathead with a little excitement behind him. "Mr. Goathead, I went to the bilge with the captain. The bottom of this ship is amazing. The bottom of the cabin is torn apart and has a very strange door." Duncan immediately stopped worrying about how to start a related topic with Goathead. He almost forgot that he was carrying a puppet that was full of curiosity and didn't know anything. Didn't Alice crack open the scene? He tried his best not to let himself laugh out loud, while pretending to pack his things calmly. While listening to the conversation of the two crew members, he heard the voice of the goat's head, with an unsurprising tone. "I knew you would be surprised. Miss Alice, now you realize what a great ship the Lost Land is? It can sail in different dimensions at the same time while ensuring safety." When Duncan listened, his heart suddenly moved. The situation was exactly as I had guessed. The reason why there was such a weird scene outside the crack in the bottom of the ship, it really was because it no longer belonged to the time and space where the boundless sea was located. At the same time, he was also thinking quickly. Alice, who is very curious, is full of interest in the strange sights on the lower deck of the lost country, and she seems afraid to ask too many things to herself, the captain, so that she would rather talk to the goat. Goathead asked, "But if I stood here and listened all the time, I would look weird and suspicious, and might even make Goathead turn the topic to myself in case it said ask the captain to Alice. I couldn't handle it." Thinking of this, he immediately made a plan, straightened the expression on his face, and after returning to his usual seriousness, he said calmly, Let's talk here. I'm going to take a walk outside Goat's Head. Alice is already as a member of the ship. As long as it is not too secretive about this ship, you can just tell her. When Alice heard this, a happy smile appeared on her face, and the Goat Head immediately agreed. Of course, Captain, your loyal following omission has always been a warm treat for new members. Duncan pushed the door and left the captain's cabin. But the second he left the captain's room, he concentrated again, and paid close attention to the movements in the captain's room with the help of his close connection with the lost home. After concentrating on one place, the vague perception turned into a clear real-time monitoring. Everything in the captain's room was clearly reflected in Duncan's mind. He saw that Alice simply moved a stool sitting opposite the Goat's Head. He talked about his experience of exploring the lower deck of the Lost Country with excitement, and told about the bizarre scenes in the cabin. She seemed to have completely forgotten about making the captain's supper, but Duncan didn't mind at all. He appreciates the puppet's divine assists at critical moments. Under the night, AI suddenly flapped his wings and flew to the nearby mast, as if he was about to stand on guard. Duncan walked forward slowly like a normal patrol deck, and in his mind, he was clearly passing come to the conversation in the captain's room. Alice had already talked about the weird door with the Goat Head, and the doll lady's tone was nervous. That door looks a bit scary. The captain won't let me approach it. Of course you can't get close, let alone you. Even I can't touch the door. Don't show such eyes. I know I don't have hands and feet, and the touch I said is another meaning: contact, controlling, understanding, peeping. Do you understand? That door is untouchable in this sense. You touch it and you're done. Understand? Alice seemed taken aback by Goat's Head's extremely serious tone, and she hesitated for a second or two before speaking. Then, what is that door? Duncan, who was walking around on the deck, concentrated all of a sudden, but when he heard the Goat's Head suddenly fell silent, he spoke in a deep voice after a long time, but he didn't answer any questions directly. You really didn't touch that door, did you? I didn't touch it. Alice immediately replied in a hurry, but then hesitated for a moment before continuing with uncertainty. But the captain leaned over to look through the crack of the door, and he still used it. The sword poked at something on the other side of the door. After Alice's words fell, Duncan suddenly felt the whole ship shake, and then all the mainsails and sidesails whimpered in the wind, and all the masts and cables creaked immediately, and all of this is currently being taken over by the Goat's Head. He looked up at the swaying masts and cables in surprise, as if he could sense the panic of the controller behind them through these things. In his mind, he heard the exclamation from the captain's room, which was the voice of the Goat's Head. What did you say? You said a crack in the door? The door opened a crack? Yes. Yes, Alice seemed to be frightened. The door is ajar. There is a crack, probably about as wide as a finger. The captain glanced at the other side of the door. And then? He also stabbed with a sword. Did he change at that time? Did he seem hesitant or dazed when he took you away? No, Alice replied immediately. The captain just had a serious expression on his face, and then he brought me back quickly. He seemed to be thinking about something on the way, but he was not in a daze at all. He even discussed cooking with me. What about the matter? I will go to the kitchen later. Forget about the kitchen. Do you know what's behind that door? Oh, what's behind that door? Alice's tone was a little dazed and frightened. She had never seen a Goat's Head look so serious and urgent. It felt like the ship was about to sink. Same. The tone of the Goat's Head suddenly became very low, and it slowly said, behind that door is the subspace. Duncan, who was walking on the deck, stopped. Behind that door is subspace. He was astonished, and the huge waves in his heart almost interfered with the monitoring of the captain's room. But then, he thought of another thing: the fragmented bilge, the dim, chaotic flow of light and shadow outside the cracks in the bilge. The Lost Country sailed in different dimensions at the same time, and the time and space outside the bilge were obviously different from the real world. And the bilge, there is another door. Opposite the door is the warp. Could it be that the lower half of the lost homeland is actually sailing in the warp? Exclamation. And according to Goat's Head, this kind of sailing state doesn't seem to be stable. Not only does the bilge require constant reassurance from the captain, but the door should also be tightly closed in theory, but now there is an extra gap in it. What does this mean? Does it mean that there is a problem with the tightness of the bilge? Or is something in the warp trying to get into the lost? He recalled that he tried to close the door before leaving the cabin, but no matter how hard he tried, the door remained open, a crack as solid as if it were integrated with the space. He didn't think much about it at the time, but when he recalled it, a strange idea came to his mind involuntarily. Maybe, when I tried to close the door, something on the other side of the door was against it, preventing me from closing the passage. Chapter 63 Interlaced Overlap. It was very likely that the bottom of the lost homeland had been sailing in the subspace. All along, this shocking information made Duncan's mood suddenly become very delicate. He had always known that the homeland lost was strange and dangerous, but he had never imagined that this ship would be so strange. He didn't know much about the warp, and his expertise might not even be as good as Nina's history teacher. But at least he knew that the warp was the most dangerous thing in the world, the bottom of all things that could keep saints awake at night and that the gods were deeply afraid of. That thing was so terrifying that on a ship about to set sail, some superstitious sailors didn't even dare to say the word warp out loud. Even though the warp is not a rational god that will not look at people just because they call its name, people are still so afraid to mention this word at sea. But the lost homeland, this ghost ship that has been wandering for a century, it is possible that part of it has been sailing in the warp all along, and there is even a door to the warp at the bottom of the ship. The dark and dilapidated cabin opposite the door might be the structure of the lost homeland that had been completely occupied and eroded by the warp, and that door was a seal. Duncan subconsciously lowered his head and looked at the dark deck beneath his feet. His eyes seemed to penetrate the layers of wooden boards and see the broken cabin and the chaotic light and shadow outside the cabin. He suddenly felt as if he was standing on a lit powder keg. The tiny gap in the door was the fuse of the powder keg, and he didn't know how long the fuse was. But after a brief moment of shock and tension, Duncan gradually reacted. Go-Head's behavior seemed to reveal another layer of information. Judging from the panic it showed after hearing Alice's words, it seemed that as long as Captain Duncan peeked into the subspace through the crack of the door, something very terrible would definitely happen. Until now, the Goat-Head was still in the captain's room, repeatedly confirming with Alice about the captain's mental state after that, confirming whether the captain said anything on the way back, whether he made any abnormal sounds, or whether he brought out any unusual shadows. But Duncan is very clear about his condition and he knows that everything is fine now. The illusion behind the door did frighten him for a while, and he did have a brief thought about whether to open the door, but all of this was just a purely psychological change, and he did not feel the influence of supernatural powers at all during this process. The thought was fleeting and passed away, and he didn't think that the door had any long-term impact on him. Duncan lowered his head, looked at his hands, and confirmed in his mind again and again here. His name is Duncan Abnomer, the captain of the HMS Lost. In another time and space, his name is Zhu Ming. He is an ordinary middle school teacher trapped in a bachelor apartment in the fog. Maybe Goat-Head was too nervous? It was just a crack in the door, not an open subspace passage. The lost homeland was swaying slightly in the waves, with creaking sounds coming from the mast and cables, and the translucent spiritual sail was still a little unstable, showing the nervousness and negligence of the controller behind it. Duncan looked up at the sail and suddenly calmed down. He said in a deep voice in the depths of his mind, "First mate, steer your rudder and control the sail." "Ship captain?" The goat-headed voice sounded immediately, a little flustered. Yes. Yes, captain." Duncan did not say anything, but remained as silent and serious as ever in the mental connection. He was waiting for Goat-Head to speak, and sure enough, the latter broke the silence within a few seconds. "Captain, I just heard from Miss Alice that the door at the bottom of the cabin was opened a crack." "Yes," Duncan replied calmly, "I checked it." "You did check? Miss Alice said you confirmed the situation on the other side of the door." The Goat-Head seemed to be trying to choose his words. "Do you feel, a little bit dazed? On the other side of that door I know about the warp," Duncan interrupted before the Goat-Head could finish. "Do you think I'm not in my right mind? Don't be so hesitant when you speak. Of course, you look normal." Goat-Head said immediately, "Maybe I'm too nervous. After all, this has never happened before. Since you brought the ship back, the barrier between the lost homeland and the subspace has been very stable. I didn't expect the situation to change. This is by no means a doubt of you. Bring the boat back? Bring it back from where?" Duncan keenly grasped the information revealed in the goat-headed man's words and quickly guessed some of the truth, but he did not show any abnormality. He just said casually, "According to my observation, the gap in the door is still very stable, but it is possible that it will expand further. I want to hear your opinion." "Now that it's stable, it's good news, Captain." The Goat-Head had no doubts but looked very worried. "As for my suggestion, to be honest, I don't know what to do. You left the door open with your own hands and you closed it with your own hands. You never told me what your plans were after this, nor did you mention what changes would happen after this. You have always handled the matters in the cabin yourself." "That's right," Duncan said immediately. "I don't think you have any suggestions in this regard. It seems that Goat-Head doesn't know all the information about the door under the cabin. It only knew that there was a subspace on the other side of the door and that nothing good would happen once the door was opened, and more information was actually in the hands of the real Captain Duncan. But where can we find the real Captain Duncan now?" "Captain," at this time, the voice of the Goat-Head sounded in his mind again. "What are your plans next?" "Arrange? What arrangement? Escape to land?" Captain Duncan's reputation as a world-renowned enemy would attract a fleet of ships to chase and intercept the lost homeland if it appeared near the coast of any city-state. What else could they do except continue to drift on the sea with this ship? Duncan rolled his eyes and looked up at the sky helplessly. AI, who had previously run to the mast and pretended to be on guard, flew down and landed on his shoulder, nodding and yelling, "This is a trap. Abandon ship and escape." Escape? Escape, Duncan said subconsciously, but then he reacted, "Wait, can you hear my conversation with Goathead?" He had been communicating with the Goathead through spiritual connection, so why did this pigeon suddenly fly down and say such a seemingly appropriate word? The pigeon flapped its wings and said arrogantly, "Don't talk, damn it. I have my own understanding." Duncan suddenly became curious about what pigeon soup tasted like. But he had not forgotten that the Goathead on the other side was still waiting for him to speak, so after calming himself down, he ignored the pigeon on his shoulder and continued to say in his mind, "Just do your own thing. I will always keep an eye on that door, as always." "Yes, Captain." The attitude of the lost homeland gradually stabilized, and the sails readjusted their angles, allowing this huge ship to continue moving forward on the vast ocean. The bow broke through the waves, and small waves hit the hull, making a splashing sound. Duncan finished his conversation with Goathead. He slowly walked to the edge of the deck and looked at the dark sea below. The cold, pale light of the creation of the world is reflected in the sea. He would pay attention to the door in the bilge, but simply paying attention to that door would not change the situation in any way. He needs more knowledge, needs to further understand and control his own power, and perhaps, he needs some help. These things are not on the ship, but the city-state of Planned may have them. Tomorrow Nina will return from school, and in the days that follow, she will go back to the antique shop every day after school. Her uncle Duncan must also be in the store by then. Before that, I have to transfer my main consciousness to the city-state before I can skillfully control two bodies at the same time. Such frequent perspective switching is a last resort. While transferring this time, he also wanted AI to do further tests. He wanted to see if AI could bring the things on the lost hometown to the antique shop. If he could, he wanted to confirm whether there was an upper limit on its carrying capacity and whether there would be a problem of losing the bag when carrying too many items. While various plans were brewing in his mind, Duncan's eyes were unconsciously watching the rolling waves outside. The reflection of the creation of the world in the sea appears hazy and chaotic, and the scattered glimmers seem like invisible streams of light. Creation of the world? Duncan was stunned. He suddenly felt that the sky reflected in the sea was somehow familiar. He suddenly looked up at the huge, scar-like crack in the sky. The huge wound was filled with chaotic and dim light, and the sky around the wound was filled with dissipated light fog. Looking closely, the so-called light fog was actually countless overlapping, entangled, and blurry streams of light. Just like the scenery outside the broken cabin at the bottom of the lost homeland. Chapter 64 Returned to Hong Kong. Duncan stared at the huge scar in the sky that emitted a dim glow for a long time, as if he wanted to distinguish some details he had seen before from the chaotic light mist to confirm the amazing conjecture in his mind. Is the scene outside the bottom of the lost homeland the creation of the world? If the outside of the ship is the warp, then is the creation of the world also part of the warp, or at least there is a certain connection. But in the end he was unable to see any clues, and the guesses in his mind were just guesses. The scar was too far away. Even with a monocular telescope, it was impossible to see more details. Judging from the visible part at present, it was only a little bit close to the scene outside the bottom of the lost homeland. Rather than saying that the two were similar, it was better to say that my nerves were too tense after exploring the bottom of the cabin, so I was suspicious of everything I saw. Duncan spent a long time on the deck enjoying the sea breeze, thinking and slowly calming himself down. He was also paying attention to what was happening on Goathead, and discovered that his first mate seemed to have calmed down as well, and was now seriously controlling the lost homeland. But Duncan still keenly felt that there was a vague sense of tension spreading throughout the ship. This tension seemed to have no source, and it permeated the entire living ghost ship, the towering masts, the interlaced sails, the ropes piled on the deck. These silent things in the darkness seemed to be filled with tense and suppressed whispers, discussing the matter of that door. This was the first time Duncan had sensed the emotional changes of the ship directly in his mind. It seemed that after returning from the bilge, his connection to the ship had deepened. Now, the entire ship was paying attention to the captain, watching to see if he had any unusual behavior after peeking at the other side of the door. The evening breeze blew in his face. Duncan took a deep breath and slowly walked towards the captain's room. His fingers tapped lightly on the handrail beside the ship's side, and he said as if talking to himself, "Relax. This matter is nothing special." This time, he finally felt the changes more clearly. The tension that filled the entire ship slowly subsided, The ropes were no longer tight, the sails were hoisted, and the slight creaking sound coming from below the deck gradually subsided. The ship seemed to have finally confirmed that the captain was still the captain. Duncan returned to the door of the captain's room, but he did not open the door as usual. Instead, after a slight hesitation, he grasped the door handle, exerted a little force, and pushed the door inward. The door opened, revealing a surging black fog. Duncan walked towards the black fog, and AI, the pigeon that had been perched on his shoulder, suddenly flapped its wings and flew to a mess not far away, shouting as it flew, "The road ahead is blocked! The road ahead is blocked!" Duncan looked at the pigeon that suddenly ran away with some curiosity, but still took a step forward. He returned to his familiar bachelor apartment. Ju-Ming lowered his head and checked his body at this moment. Familiar hands, familiar shirt, familiar trousers. He was not as strong as Captain Duncan, but just an ordinary human being. He raised his head again and looked at the situation in the room. Everything was exactly the same as when he left, not even the dust had increased. Ju-Ming observed the furnishings in the room thoughtfully, and then suddenly turned back to look at the door. He looked at the door of the bachelor apartment, recalling the door he saw in the bottom cabin of the lost hometown, and recalling the position and angle of the gap in the door. He stood in the corresponding position, first assuming that there was a person opposite the door, and then looked in the direction opposite to the door. From the crack in the door, one could indeed see the center of the room, and the somewhat messy desk with a computer and other sundries on it. He usually worked at that desk, reading, writing, or correcting students' homework and test papers. Ju-Ming slowly opened the door a crack, and little by little, put his eyes close to the crack. At this moment, he felt his heart pounding. Even though his mind told him that this was an illogical thought, he still couldn't help but wonder. Would an eye suddenly appear across the crack in the door? Would a ghost captain with a gloomy and serious expression suddenly appear? Would a pirate sword suddenly stab in? He stuck closer, his eyes looking outside. There was only a rolling black fog outside, just like always. Ju-Ming suddenly breathed a sigh of relief, but for some reason, he felt a strange sense of loss in his heart, a feeling that his expectations had been dashed, and as if he had lost some fun. He shook his head vigorously to get rid of this strange mentality, and then slowly walked to the desk. The things he left in the room before leaving were still there, including the scraps of paper covered with scribblings, the organized diary, and the computer screen that was still on even after the power was cut off. Nothing seems to have changed. Ju-Ming exhaled, but suddenly his expression froze. There are changes. His eyes were fixed on a corner of the desk. In that inconspicuous corner, there was now a small object. It was an extremely exquisite decoration, a lifelike model, a ship. The lost homeland. Ju-Ming was struck by lightning and sat in his chair in a daze for half a minute without moving. He was 100% sure that this decoration did not originally exist on his desk. Especially, this decoration was the model of the lost hometown. After a long time, he suddenly blinked his eyes, reached out and carefully took the model that appeared on the desk at some point, and held it in front of his eyes to look at it carefully. This lifelike ghost ship is only half a foot long, and the weight in the hand is not much different from an ordinary model. At the same time, it is so detailed that Ju-Ming carefully observed it for a long time. He could even see every rope and every bucket on the deck. Compared to the real Homelander, the only difference between this ship and the real Homelander is perhaps its size. Suddenly, Ju-Ming seemed to have thought of something. He brought the ship in front of him and carefully knocked open the door of the captain's room at the stern with his fingers. He looked inside through the small door and searched carefully. There is no goat head on the miniature nautical table. Likewise, Alice is not visible on the ship. Ju-Ming felt a little strange in his heart. He didn't know why he thought that Alice would appear on this miniature version of the lost homeland. This was obviously an outrageous idea. Perhaps the appearance of this ship itself is too outrageous? Ju-Ming held the small Lost Hometown book in his hands and pondered for a long time. He didn't know how the ship appeared on his desk, but it was obvious that the connection between his sealed-off bachelor apartment and the world across the door was deeper than he had imagined. The change may have occurred after he took the helm, or it may have occurred after he peeked into the subspace through the crack in the door. He leaned back in his chair and let his mind calm down. He found that he could still feel what was happening on the other side of the door. He could feel the lost homeland, the goat head, and even he could feel the city-state of Planned, which was an unknown distance away, and the other body in the antique shop. Ju-Ming didn't know how long he had been thinking like this before he suddenly blinked as if waking up. He looked at the ghost ship still in his hands, and then looked at an empty shelf at the end of the room. The shelf had been bought several years ago, but until the vision came, he had never found a chance to fill it up. At this moment, there were only a few decorative crystal bottles on it that he had been deceived into buying online, and the rest of the grids were all empty. Ju-Ming held the lost hometown in his hands and carefully placed this exquisite model on the shelf. After placing it, he took 2 steps back and carefully looked at his achievements, seeming to be very satisfied with the place he chose. How this thing appeared here is still a mystery, but at least, during these days of being trapped, he can decorate his cabin again. A loud and melodious whistle broke the calm on the sea. Vanna, who had arrived at the port early, immediately walked to the edge of the observation deck and looked at the situation on the dock. The entire port had been cleared in advance. The once busy planned main port was now deserted. The ordinary stevedores and handover personnel were gone from the docks. Instead, there were fully armed and ready sheriff's troops and guards from the church. 12 steam walkers block all roads leading to the dock area. And on the sea outside the harbor, among the gently rising and falling waves, a beautiful steam-powered ship was slowly approaching. White Oak. Chapter 65 Duncan's White Oak. The White Oak is back after a long period of loss of communication and diversion of their route. This advanced steamship, belonging to the Explorers Association, has finally returned to the city-state of Plant. Many people are waiting for the ship to return, and countless pairs of eyes are nervously watching the silhouette that is gradually approaching on the sea. Judge Fanna saw that at the same time, as the whistle of the White Oak sounded, the personnel on the dock immediately took action. The staff guiding the ship to the shore have arrived at the location and began to signal the White Oak with lights and flags, and the guards under the church went to activate the deep-sea sacred objects that were placed around Pier 1 last night. That it is a large number of boundary monuments cast in bronze. The name of the storm goddess Kimona is engraved on its base, and the grooves on the top are filled with holy oil and spices. When these boundary monuments are activated, the White Oak docks the area will be blocked and become a sanctuary watched by the goddess. Farther away are the sheriffs sent by the city hall. These ordinary people are not good at dealing with supernatural things, so their main job is to block all intersections with heavy firepower. Ordinary guns are difficult to deal with strange and invisible curses, but if there were corporeal defilers coming out of the White Oak, 8mm rounds and 4-pounders would do a lot. Sometimes Fanna can't help but be grateful for the progress of science and technology. These engineering crystallizations have given weak ordinary people a certain amount of power to intervene in such extraordinary events, although the results brought about by technological progress are mixed. Bad, but at least, the support of rotary machine guns and artillery has indeed greatly reduced the casualties of fellow church members over the years. Fanna looked over the pier and looked at the sea in the distance. The White Oak whistled a second time, and under the guidance of the light signals on the shore, the ship began to slow down slowly and stopped at a distance from the pier. A priest standing beside Fanna was slightly relieved when he saw this, and said in a low voice, "The White Oak has carried out the order. It seems that at least that ship is still controlled by humans. It cannot be said for the time being that many people affected by abnormalities or visions will look no different from ordinary people until the mutation occurs." Fanna shook her head. "Send a second set of signals, send out inspection boats, and let the coastal defense guns be ready at any time. Get ready. As soon as there is any movement on the ship, open fire." The order from the judge was quickly conveyed. Since the communication device of the White Oak was damaged, the people on the shore could only use lights and flags to communicate with that ship. After a complex set of lights and semaphores, the White Oak's 3 lights came on at the bow of the ship, and immediately after, the rope ladder on its side was lowered. A speedboat was released from the pier, driven by a small steam engine, and headed towards the White Oak at high speed. On the speedboat was a whole team of guardians, including 8 combatants, a commander, and a deep-sea priest. These loyal priests lit incense on the boat and chanted holy name. They did not board the ship immediately after approaching the White Oak, but first circled around the big ship and sprinkled holy oil mixed with seaweed extract in the nearby sea water. Immediately after the oil fell into the seawater, it gave off a slight glow and gradually joined together, finally forming a ring that completely surrounded the White Oak. After doing all this, the priests on the speedboat really approached the White Oak and boarded the ship along the rope ladder. All this fell into the eyes of Fanna on the observation deck. It is extremely dangerous to let a ship that has lost contact at sea go home, especially it is an ocean-going ship that was responsible for transporting abnormal objects. The White Oak cannot directly dock. It first needs to be within a safe distance. The boarding inspection of the speedboat is accepted outside, and the pier of Prand can only be approached after the initial confirmation that there is no sign of evil god corruption on board, but after that, the people on board are still not allowed to disembark, and they still need to accept the second round of inspection by the clergy. The entire ship will also undergo a more stringent and comprehensive search and purification. After that, all personnel on board will be observed in the church at the pier for at least a few days, and at most several weeks, and the entire ship will also be incensed purified for at least a week. Only when all these processes are completed, and there are no accidents in the whole process, Can the civilized world dare to accept these people who have lost their way at sea to return home, and if any link goes wrong, the White Oak and its crew will have to die the sea. The storm goddess will take the souls of these poor people. This cold and even cruel law is not from anyone's malice, but the way of survival that human society has explored so far. Of course, there are also city-states that are unwilling or unable to implement these strict rules. Most of these city-states are now concentrated in the first 2 units of the 2nd volume of middle school history courses, which are compulsory at the end of the semester. Time passed by every minute and every second, and everyone was waiting for the guard team boarding the ship to send back a signal. But there were only 2 possible signals. If everything was safe, the team would use special psionic communication to send back the signal. If the boat has been contaminated, the team will fight to the last person and try to detonate the nitroglycerin on the boat before all are killed. If an ocean-going ship of the size of White Oak is really deeply polluted by subspace or something, it is impossible for the mere people who boarded the ship to come back alive. Fan-Na crossed her arms and lightly tapped the metal on the gauntlet. The bell suddenly sounded from the chapel on the pier, and the steam relief pipes on both sides of the bell tower rang 3 long tones. The priest in the church received the secret message sent back by the inspection team, and the church bell and whistle sounded to inform all the teams on the pier. The ship is safe, and the White Oak has applied for docking, and there are special reports to be made at the same time. Fan-Na immediately breathed a sigh of relief. At least for now, that ship seems to be in order, which is already the greatest good news. As for reporting on special circumstances, she was not surprised. A ship that got lost in a strange way docked again. It would be strange if there was no special situation to report. The White Oak is slowly docking. This ocean-going ship has finally returned to the pier of the civilized world after experiencing a lot of twists and turns. Although the people on board have not yet been allowed to land, they must be able to relax a lot. More church guards began to board the ship in an orderly manner, ready to conduct thorough inspections and inquiries. Fan-Na also left the observation deck and personally led a team of priests to the pier. She walked through the long springboard and finally stepped onto the deck of the White Oak, and saw the gray-haired, burly captain on the foredeck. The old captain looked a little haggard, obviously working under high tension for too long, but after seeing the church judge approaching, the old man immediately cheered up and took the initiative to come to Fan-Na. "Hi, I'm Fan-Na, the judge of the Deep Sea Church of Perlin, Captain Lawrence." Fan-Na didn't like redundant etiquette, she chose to greet straight to the point. "Let's skip the introduction firstly, sorry. I hope you and your crew can understand the strict inspections of the city-state authorities and the church." "Of course, Your Excellency the Inquisitor." Lawrence nodded immediately. He wanted to say Miss Inquisitor. After all, the other party seemed to be about the same age as his own daughter, but he changed it to a more respectful title at the end of the day. "I had expected it, after all we lost contact for so long." Fan-Na nodded. "Tell me briefly what happened to the White Oak. Why did you lose contact? Then why did you suddenly appear on an unreported route? What about the abnormalities 99 of the cargo you escorted?" As soon as these words came out, the expression on Lawrence's face was filled with frustration and tension. He sighed, first subconsciously looked around quickly, and then slowly said, "You may not believe what I said. We met at the legendary lost homeland." In front of his eyes, the lady judge with a serious expression suddenly froze on the spot like petrified, with a strange expression on her face. He couldn't tell what the expression meant, but it looked like he had been hit by the lost land a few days ago. "Judge, Your Excellency?" Lawrence asked cautiously. "You Captain Lawrence?" Fan-Na seemed to wake up suddenly, staring at the captain in front of her. "Say it again?" "You may not believe me when I tell you. I'll say the second half of the sentence." "We encountered the legendary ship Lost, I believe." Lawrence was stunned. "Then you may need to stay at the pier for a few more days, Captain," Fan-Na said with a serious face. "This matter is very serious. Very serious. Wait, you encountered the lost homelander, but the whole crew survive?" The expression on Miss Judge's face suddenly changed slightly, and there was a hint of doubt in her eyes. Seeing this, Lawrence quickly opened his hands. "We are all fine, but the Lost Lands took away anomaly 099, which is the puppet coffin. I suspect that a ghost ship is coming for the coffin of the puppet." "The lost homelander took anomaly 099? Fan-Na frowned, and then asked, "What happened after that? Did it let you go?" Yes, Lawrence also became nervous, and vaguely realized something. "Your Excellency, is the city recently? It's okay to tell you, after all. It seems that your contact may be more serious than ours." Fan-Na sighed, looking at the old captain in front of her. "Captain Lawrence, you may not be the only one who has lost your homeland recently. No one I've ever dealt with. Let's find a quiet place. I need to know more." Chapter 66 Guillotine. The captain's cabin of the White Oak was temporarily transformed into a sanctuary. The scent of incense wafted through the room. Amulets depicting storm runes were hung on all the doors and windows. The priests also set up bronze boundary markers at the four corners of the room, and tied strips of cloth soaked in holy oil on the top of the boundary markers. Finally, a copy of Storm Codex from the cathedral was brought into the room to serve as the pillar of the entire sanctuary. After completing all these arrangements, Captain Lawrence and Judge Vanna entered the captain's room together. "I hope you don't mind our renovation here," Vanna said calmly, maintaining the reserve and proper courtesy that a high-level clergyman should have. "Everything is for safety." "Of course, everything is for safety. What I lack most right now is a sense of security." Captain Lawrence immediately nodded in understanding. He looked around at the sacred things in the room and breathed a sigh of relief. With these things here, ordinary twisted and contaminated things would probably die after just one look at them. "You can talk to me about the lost homeland without worry," Vanna nodded. "Let's start from the beginning. Where were you and how did you see the ship?" Captain Lawrence calmed down and began to recount the most terrifying day in his memory. It's like this: Captain Lawrence spoke in great detail. In front of the professional judge, he even accurately told what he had eaten for breakfast that day and what time the sailors on the ship started eating. For those things he couldn't remember clearly, he looked through the captain's log and the sailors' diaries of that day. Experienced captains all know this. Before many abnormal phenomena occur, there are often seemingly ordinary signs. People at the time may find it difficult to realize the connection between these things, but professionals who review the situation afterwards can summarize experience from those daily clues and use them to warn future generations. Every captain on the vast ocean has the habit of recording a logbook at the same time. Reading one's own logbook is the only safe way of reading on the vast ocean besides reading church classics. After hearing the thrilling story, Vanna's heroic brows gradually wrinkled. The situation is more serious and bizarre than imagined. She originally thought that Captain Lawrence's so-called encounter was just a glance, or at most a close pass by the ghost ship, so the terrible captain only took away the cargo on the ship without hurting anyone, but she didn't expect that it was actually a head-on collision. The entire White Oak crashed into the cabin of the lost homeland, and the entire ship was swept from top to bottom by the green ghost flames. According to Captain Lawrence, the White Oak had even begun to transform from top to bottom into the lost homeland. He could clearly see his body transforming into a spirit. The holy emblem beacon on the ship was in a shut-down state at the time. The holy objects in the ballast were unresponsive, the protective materials added to the hull were useless, the priests could only protect themselves, and the entire ship was at the depth of the spiritual world, unable to ask for help from the outside world. It can be said that the White Oak was already the captain's prey at the time, and there was no possibility of escaping by luck at all. The only reason Captain Lawrence is still standing here today is because the lost homeland gave up this prize without hesitation. "Your Excellency, Judge," Captain Lawrence finally finished telling his story. Seeing that Vanna didn't respond for a long time, he couldn't help but ask, "Tell me, what exactly did the lost homeland want to do at that time? Did they really just want to take away Anomaly 099? Vanna glanced at him and said, "Isn't this what you have always believed?" I have always believed this, but now I am not sure," Lawrence sighed, "especially since you just said that the ghost captain recently extended his power to the planned city-state. I always feel that things are not that simple." "No one can guess what the ghost captain is thinking," Vanna shook her head. "All we can do now is to conduct a thorough inspection of the White Oak to prevent the ship from carrying any invasion objects. You and your crew will have to endure some injustice these days. Before the investigation is completed, you are not allowed to contact anyone except the church priests, including family visits." Captain Lawrence lowered his head. "I understand." He then paused and then asked, "Then, about the theft of anomalies P99?" Vanna knew what the captain was worried about. The strange and terrifying anomalies at sea are a threat hanging over the head of civilization. But before considering these long-term and widespread threats, the captain is first and foremost an ordinary person who needs to support his family. He has lost Anomaly 099, and this responsibility is too heavy for an ordinary person. "Don't worry, the church will explain this matter to the city-state authorities and the Explorers Association," she said calmly. "The appearance of the lost homeland was force majeure, and the loss of Anomaly 099 is not your responsibility. Even if it was a church ship that was escorting it, the result would probably be the same." The expression on Captain Lawrence's face visibly relaxed a little. However, there was something else in Vanna's mind that she hadn't said out loud. After all, anomalies are always on the edge of being sealed and out of control. Every year, new anomalies get out of control, and there are always city-state residents who lose their lives under the influence of strange things. The church has been fighting these out-of-control anomalies for thousands of years. In the face of this long and huge dynamic balance, the loss of an anomaly is not unimaginable even if the number of that anomaly is within the 100th digit. But as a judge she couldn't say such words. Also at this moment, Captain Lawrence suddenly broke the silence again. Hesitantly, I want to know, what is so special about anomaly 099? He paused for a moment, then quickly added, of course, I did get a copy of the information when I took on the escort mission, but it mainly involved the sealing method of anomaly 099 and the emergency treatment method after the initial loss of control. It did not involve the origin and background of this anomaly, and the situation after it completely lost control. You know, it is an anomaly within the 100 after all. The more ordinary people around it know about it, the more likely it is to lose control. I still understand this rule. But now that anomaly 099 has been abducted by the lost hometown, according to regulations, it should be considered completely out of control. So I can tell you, Vanna nodded before Captain Lawrence finished speaking. Anomaly 099 has escaped the control of civilized society. According to regulations, its relevant information will be announced to the Adventurers Association and the extraordinary teams of various city-states in order to capture and reseal it in the future. You are a member of the Adventurers Association and the last person to contact Anomaly 099. You should know this information. At this point, she paused to think for a moment, and then she slowly said while sorting out the information she knew, Anomaly 099, puppet coffin. The appearance is a gorgeous wooden box like a coffin, inside of which there is a puppet in a sleeping state. The puppet has silver hair and purple skirt, and the body shape is similar to that of an ordinary human. The anomaly was first discovered in the Frigid Sea in the north. The doll inside it looks very similar to the Frost Queen Lenoir, who was beheaded by rebels half a century ago. However, there is no evidence to prove that there is a real connection between the two. This anomaly has no thinking tendency and no consciousness, but it is very likely to actively perceive the outside world driven by instinct and exert influence on the outside world. You should be very familiar with the method of sealing anomaly 099, so I won't repeat it. As for its dangers, first, the puppet coffin has a tendency to settle down. Once it stays in a certain area for a long time, it will regard the area as its own territory, and it will be difficult to move it. It will gradually expand its influence in its settlement, and at the same time, the strength of its seal will be drastically weakened, becoming more and more likely to get out of control. This is also a common feature of quite a few anomalies, so anomaly 099 needs to be frequently moved to prevent it from growing excessively. Secondly, if the puppet coffin goes out of control, all humanoid units within a certain range around it, including humans, elves, sentient, and Jai-% Luo people, will be used as verification targets. This range ranges from a few hundred meters to nearly 1,000 meters, and will grow with the settlement time of anomaly 099. The specific verification standard is not yet clear, but it is known that the selected target will immediately lose freedom of movement as if controlled by puppet strings, and will unconsciously kneel and bow in the direction of the puppet coffin, just like the people of the city-state worshipping the queen. Once this action is completed, the victim will be beheaded immediately. This beheading cannot be avoided, defended, or exempted. It is meaningless to cast any blessing on the victim or wear armor. The only condition for it to take effect is to be selected by the puppet. The victim will be directly beheaded after the action is completed. After the beheading is completed, the puppet will temporarily remain silent for 4 to 6 hours, and then begin to look for the next target until no one is alive in the range, or the coffin is resealed. When out of control, the puppet coffin has the ability to move with extremely fast speed and great strength, and will break free from capture in all kinds of unimaginable ways. In addition, the coffin itself is extremely strong, so the harm it poses after losing control will be further increased. In the several incidents where the puppet coffin went out of control, only one saint survived. However, that saint happened to have the bloodline of the northern Frost city-state. Therefore, it is unclear whether it was the saint's power that resisted the curse, or because his bloodline happened to meet the absolution conditions of the puppet coffin. Listening to the calm and indifferent narration of the young judge, Captain Lawrence felt his hair stand up little by little. His first thought was, it is really hard to make money from the city-state authorities. No wonder the reward for escorting anomaly 099 is almost 5 times that of escorting ordinary anomalies. This kind of thing completely ignores defense and dodge, and the only condition for effectiveness is the puppet is targeting you to launch lethal damage. Put it on an ocean-going ship with no escape, it is simply a horrible thing that is doomed to kill everyone on board if it gets out of control. Only the captains of the Explorers Association who specialize in extreme survival would take on this kind of job. At the same time, he heard the voice of Judge Vanek continue, For the strange and terrifying ability of the puppet coffin, the church gave it a name when it created the file for Anomaly 099. The name was named after the torture instrument used by the rebels to execute the Frost Queen half a century ago, Alice Guillotine. Chapter 67 A Beautiful Morning on the Lost Country. Alice, keep your head in check. The beautiful morning on the Lost Country began with the captain's angry roar on the deck. Duncan stood outside the captain's room, pointing at the puppet's head hanging from a nearby beam. The corners of his eyes twitched for a long time before he finally saw a puppet body in a dark purple gothic dress panikedly standing up from the side, putting the take off the head that hangs in the air. With a crisp bore sound in the air, Miss Puppet put her head back, and then trotted over. Hey, what are you doing hanging your head at my door in the early morning? Duncan stared at this cursed doll who was always alive every now and then. To be honest, he opened the door early in the morning and saw a head floating in the wind. Who is that? Don't be surprised. Fortunately, he has been on the ship for a long time, and his nerves are stronger than before, otherwise he might have to lose his temper. Don't tell me you were watching. There are pigeons on the watch. I washed my hair in the morning. Alice shrank her neck and replied cautiously, I can't get my hair dry anyway, so I just want to hang it higher to blow dry. Duncan. Alice glanced at Duncan carefully. Captain, are you angry? You're reasonable. Duncan held back for a long time, and finally could only hold back these words from his bronchus. While restraining the shaking of his face muscles, he had to admit that at least from the life of Alice, the abnormal 099, from the perspective of the method, it's really okay to hang your head a little higher to blow the air. The winch on the ship takes a nap as a habit, and the bucket for cleaning the deck has to be rolled to the stern to bask in the sun every afternoon. Living on this ship is necessary. It is heartwarming. From this point of view, Alice, a puppet who has adapted to life on the ship, is really integrating with the ship now. Captain, as long as you're not angry. Alice laughed immediately. She seemed to have not only adapted to the life on this ship, but also adapted to or understood the captain's temper. She still respected this powerful ghost captain, but she didn't just like at the beginning. She only had pure fear. But now she seemed to let go a lot, and even dared to bargain with the captain. After that, I can still hang my head. No, you can find a place by yourself except the door of the captain's cabin. Duncan glanced at the doll. I don't want to see the heads of the crew members hanging on the door, or the headless body hanging on the door as soon as I push the door. Shake around. Alice could only lower her head honestly. Oh, okay. Duncan still looked at her thoughtfully. Captain? Alice was a little terrified by the other party's eyes. Why do you keep staring at me? I just suddenly thought of a question, Duncan said while thinking. You will lose your hair, right? Do you also lose it when you wash your hair? Then, can you grow your hair? Alice was stunned for a moment. Her expression was like the pigeon who was suddenly stuck. After a long time, her eyes suddenly rounded, and she looked at Duncan with a look of astonishment on her face. I haven't thought about this question at all. Captain, you. The second half of her sentence was almost crying, and she dared not say the last few words. She actually wanted to ask Captain, are you a devil? But she was afraid that Mr. Goathead would scold him after she said this, because she underestimated the captain. Powerful and excessively beautified the image of the first natural disaster at sea. Duncan didn't care what Alice swallowed back at the end. His thoughts had already diverged. Look, although you can walk, jump, and talk, your body is still like a real doll. No, you need to eat, but don't need to drink water, and you can forcefully press back the joints that fall off. So can I understand that your hair is a non-renewable resource? If you wash it too much, you will become bald. And if you comb your hair too much? Alice was about to cry. Captain, why would you think of such a terrible thing? Duncan, actually, I've been wanting to ask you since you cooked that bowl of fish head soup. Although Alice was sad, she was stunned for a moment after hearing this. But what I cook is only fish soup, Duncan said confidently. Nonsense, there are fish heads and soup in it. Why not fish head soup? Alice. Captain, you are reasonable. The beautiful morning on the Lost Homelander begins with everyone recognizing each other as reasonable. Miss Puppet left in a trance. She seemed to suddenly have important issues related to the future of life to think about. Duncan was in a good mood. He blew the sea breeze, and then had a simple breakfast. The content was yesterday the fish fillets baked by Alice, shredded cheese, and spirits from the city-state of Planned are not very delicious, but they are the top accompaniments to the current meals on the Lost Country. In the chart room of the captain's cabin, the goat's head looked curiously at Duncan, who was in a happy mood. Captain, what's wrong with Miss Alice? I noticed that she went back to the cabin absent-mindedly and hit the door twice when she returned to her room. She seems to be preoccupied? She's facing a major life challenge, and I don't think you'll have to worry about her getting into fights with weird things on board for a long time to come. Duncan swung his glass of wine with a look of successful mischief on his face. Smile, but I'm really curious about one thing, What are you curious about? Will the cursing puppet really become a bald puppet if its hair falls out? Duncan seriously discussed with the goat head, should there be some kind of supernatural power to ensure that? To ensure a certain state? Unfortunately, before I had time to discuss this with Alice, she ran away. Goat head, Duncan looked curiously at this guy who was always noisy on weekdays. Why don't you talk anymore? The goat's head held back for a long time, and finally choked out a sentence. You really deserve to be the most terrifying natural disaster in the boundless sea. I can't ask this kind of question even if I am killed. Duncan shrugged and stood up from behind the nautical table. I'm going to leave again, he said to the goat head, and snapped his fingers at the same time. A cluster of green flames exploded out of thin air, and a pigeon in the form of a dead bird, descended from the flames and landed on his shoulder. As always, you are at the helm of order, Captain. Your faithful omissions below will not disappoint you. The goat head immediately agreed with a rising tone, and then asked curiously, Captain, you seem to be very keen on walking in the spirit world recently? Is there anything on land that interests you? Duncan didn't answer right away, but spoke after a little thought. I suddenly discovered recently that after a century of development, the world has become a little more interesting. This is his response after weighing it. This sentence did not reveal any directional information, nor did it reveal his lack of knowledge. At the same time, it reasonably planted an introduction that allowed him to pay more attention to the land in the future. The behavior of the world is more normal, and it can also serve as a reasonable motivation for the lost to return to the civilized world if necessary. And this answer should not violate the image of Captain Duncan too much. The biggest natural disaster in the boundless sea can also be a happy person, because a happy person is compatible with everything. The goat's head really didn't react abnormally, as if all the decisions made by Captain Duncan were taken for granted. Oh, you were right. After all these years, those weak city-states should come up with something that interests you. It's normal for you to want to use this to amuse yourself. If this is the case, should the lost homeland make preparations? Which one are you planning to invade? Prand? Lenza? Or the frost in the north? Duncan listened to the first half of Goat Head's words, and still nodded secretly in his heart, thinking that this number one dogleg really knew how to figure out what he wanted to do. But when he heard the second half, his blood started to turn cold. The cooperation of this guy directly turned into a fire. He had to interrupt quickly. When did I say I was going to invade the city-state? Something interesting just happened. Wouldn't it be a pity to destroy it? Yes, what you said is that my suggestion is too reckless. Goat's Head immediately changed his words. Actually, I thought you planned to drive a boat there in the future. Of course, since you don't have such an idea, then this suggestion should be invalidated. In fact, this is also very good. After all, the big city-state still has some strength, and it is a bit risky to approach rashly. Don't casually mention the invasion of the city-state in the future. Duncan glanced at the goat's head and added another layer of insurance. We have been derailed from the world for 100 years, and now I want to regain control of the changes in civilized society. There are a lot of long-term changes involved. Don't make redundant plans until I have a clear order. At your command, Captain. Chapter 68 New Connection. The goat's head was a dangerous fellow. Duncan had known it from the beginning. It was dangerous not just because it was an anomaly of unknown origin, but because it had served the real Captain Duncan and was still following the old rules to this day. Act and think in the right way. From the perspective of the goat's head, the city-states on land are meaningless, the mortals in the city-states are ignorant and ridiculous, the fleets of the weak city-states are food, and plundering and killing them is the natural daily life of the lost home. Duncan didn't know how long it would take him to adjust the goat's head's thinking habits, but he knew that this process had to be subtle. It was the safest way to use some reasonable reasons to change himself and the lost country's behavior style. He took one last look at the goat's head, who was quietly waiting on the nautical table, and confirmed that the other party had taken over the sail and rudder system of the lost home, and then opened the door and walked into his bedroom. This afternoon, Nina will be back at the antique shop, and before that, he will have Pigeon Eye complete some more tests. The door leading to the captain's bedroom was closed, and the goat's head quietly watched the direction of the door in the dark. It was silent for an unknown period of time, until it was confirmed that the captain's consciousness had set off to walk in the spirit world, and then it muttered softly as if talking to itself. Get up, it's really not affected by the subspace in the dark. The carved wooden goat's head creaked and turned. It seemed to be looking around the room, and it seemed to look around the entire ship through the room. The lost home, the lost home. What terrible thing did you fish up back then? Duncan has returned to the familiar dark space. He feels his will extending among countless starlight and twilight lines, and the two ends of the extension trajectory are the lost country and the antique shop in the city-state of Plant. It seems that as the time of this two-wire connection prolongs, this feeling is becoming clearer. Now he doesn't even need to concentrate deliberately, he can perceive the situation over there in the antique shop, and he can also remotely control the situation there. Carry out some simple daily activities with the body in the furniture store. This is obviously a good thing. An antique shop owner who spends more than half of the time sleeping in the shop is obviously suspicious, and even if the body just gets up and moves, standing at the door for a minute or two, it can get rid of many unnecessary eyes. Duncan did not immediately transmit his main consciousness to the city-state of Prand, but stopped in the dark space. He carefully perceived the changes in the space, and then looked back to his side. In the vast darkness, AI in the form of a bone pigeon is hovering silently, his ghostly body continuously sprinkles dots of green fire while flying, and in the center of the area where AI is circling, there are some blurred phantoms. Among those phantoms were the sun amulet brought to the lost home, a simple and old dagger, a piece of cheese, a round cannonball, and a hard-dried salted fish. These are all test items he prepared before departure, to further test AI's ability to carry items and changes during the carrying process. The short dagger was found in the hold of the ship. It may have belonged to a certain sailor. It is a common item without thinking. The cheese is brought from the kitchen. It has the property of not spoiling. The shells are from the ammunition storehouse, and the dried salted fish it was one of the catches of the last fishing trip. It had just been dried in the past 2 days. In fact, it hadn't been fully dried yet, but it was already hard. Duncan looked at AI who was hovering around these phantoms, and nodded slightly. So you always carry things like this every time. AI flapped his wings and let out a hoarse and sharp cry, "Sit tight, sit tight, sit tight." Duncan smiled, then concentrated his mind and prepared to project the main consciousness. But at the moment when he was concentrating, he suddenly saw a strange glimmer of light appearing at the end of the light stream pointing to the city-state of Peeland in the distance. Duncan stopped immediately, staring in amazement at the light flickering among countless dim star spots. The light seemed to have been there originally, and it only turned from dark to bright when he focused his attention, as if suddenly noticing the general, began to exude a clear sense of presence. What it is? Duncan tried to move towards the twilight in doubt, but with just one thought, he had already crossed the vast darkness. The twilight rapidly expanded before his eyes, and turned into a stream of light flowing undulating in front of his eyes. Only then did he realize that there was an undetectable connection between this undulating stream of light and himself, just like the connection between his own body on the lost home and the spare body in an antique shop. Same as contact. This is another spare body to be selected? Such a conjecture could not help but appear in Duncan's mind. But he quickly shook his head. The glimmer of light flowing in front of his eyes far exceeded those light spots representing the body in terms of scale. Such a large piece of light, not so much representing looking at the body to be selected. It is better to say that it is some kind of huge object that has established a connection with himself. While hesitating, he made up his mind, stretched out his hand and carefully touched the light. In the next second, a huge and strange perception suddenly flooded into his mind. He couldn't see the surrounding things clearly, but felt the sea breeze blowing his body, and felt the waves slowly undulating around him. He felt he saw a lot of people walking around him, even on his body. He heard the voices of people talking from all directions, but all the voices were mixed together, as if separated by a thick curtain. He could not hear them at all clear. He vaguely realized that he was perceiving the environment through the perspective of a behemoth, but this behemoth was not suitable for his spirit to descend directly, or there was some kind of power protecting this thing, preventing his own power from intruding, so all his perceptions are in a state of being stagnated and blocked. This behemoth seems to be staying on the sea near the land, and many people are gathering here. There was a tense and serious atmosphere in the crowd. They seemed to be seriously dealing with some dangerous factors, and everyone's conversations were low and concise. Duncan tried his best to concentrate, trying to hear what these voices seemed to be talking about through a thick curtain. He worked hard for a long time, and finally heard a word that was repeatedly mentioned in these buzzing, rumbling, overlapping and mixed voices: white oak. Duncan took back the hand that touched the light flow, and looked at the floating twilight in front of him with some astonishment. A faint light floated in the darkness, faintly showing the phantom of the ship. White oak. The name seems a little familiar, but I can't remember when I heard it. Duncan tried hard to think and recall, and finally found some superficial impressions in the depths of his memory. He recalled the ship he collided with in the spirit world when he was at the helm for the first time, and recalled when the lost homeland and the other party penetrated. And in the past, I seem to have seen its name on the side of the ship. That ship seems to be called the White Oak. Immediately afterwards, he remembered the newspaper he bought in the city-state of Pland. At that time, an inconspicuous section in the newspaper seemed to have mentioned this incident, saying that the ocean-going ship White Oak which had been lost for several days, would be in the near future. Duncan stared blankly at the glimmer of light floating in front of him. This is the White Oak, which was responsible for escorting the White Oak of Anomaly 099. The old captain and his crew who had tried to speak to him seemed to have finally arrived in the city-state of Purdue, which is something to be happy about. Obviously, he established a connection with this ship. Could it be that the connection was established after the Spirit World collision accident? Because the flames from the lost homeland spread to the White Oak? Conjectures vaguely emerged in Duncan's mind, and he speculated on the various attributes of his spiritual body flames. At the same time, he was also thinking about whether the connection between himself and this steamship could be useful. After so long adrift on the lost home, he valued every connection between himself and the civilized world. Now it seems that although the White Oak has already docked, it is still in a state of blockade and surveillance. Those nervous people should be professionals in the city-state who specialize in dealing with extraordinary visions. Obviously, for the people in the city-state, a ship that has lost its way at sea is dangerous, and the experience of the other party's negative distance contact with the lost homeland may also be a major pending issue. Duncan is still a little self-conscious about himself and the terrible reputation of the lost homeland. After thinking for a while, Duncan stepped back cautiously, not continuing to touch the cloud of light in front of him. As the #1 boss on the boundless sea, he doesn't intend to deal with the protectors of the city-state, and he doesn't want to reveal that the White Oak has established contact with Captain Duncan without knowing the details of those extraordinary experts' fact. He doesn't want the connection between himself and this steamship to be discovered and cleared away anyway. The connection has been established, as stable as an anchor cable under the sea. He can wait patiently. The White Oak's surveillance will one day lift. At that time, maybe he can still talk to the old captain calmly. Find out what the old captain was yelling to himself when the wind and waves were too strong. Chapter 69 Reliable Pigeon Express. A cool sea breeze suddenly blew across the deck, and Captain Lawrence, who had just walked outside from the room, rubbed his arms subconsciously, but he didn't know whether the feeling of wanting to get goosebumps was due to the cool sea breeze, or because of what the young judge told him. Abnormality 099, Dull Coffin, not only has the ability to move and get out of trouble after losing control, but also can continuously expand its sphere of influence, and constantly check the humanoid targets within the range, and unconditionally behead it. Only saints can resist this kind of almost the beheading effect of karma. In the past half a month of the voyage, he and his crew have been dealing with this dangerous anomaly, although in fact there was no danger in the escort trip except for the final encounter with the lost home, but at this time looking back, he still feels a little scared. But it's just a fear. He is a member of the Explorers Association, a senior ocean explorer, and his job is to deal with the infinite sea. Unlike those fishermen who only operate in safe offshore areas, he has spent more than half of his sailing career in deal with all kinds of anomalies and even visions. When accepting an abnormal delivery mission, the authorities or the church will inform you of the dangers of the transportation process in advance, and this part of the content is often the shortest in the entire entrustment contract, usually only one. This task is fatal, and the specific details cannot be disclosed. Every captain who lives between city-states knows what he is facing, and more than half of the captains are entangled in this fatal career in their later years dealing with the boundless sea all the year round. Anomalies and visions will always appear. Leave something in your destiny. Many of his colleagues of a similar age have retired, either suffering from incessant nightmares, mental problems due to various degrees of curses, or physically disabled from long voyages. Or worse, the captains and sailors on ocean-going ships have a high income far beyond the imagination of city-state residents, and they also have occupational diseases far beyond any occupation. Captain Lawrence feels that he is not a very noble person. He mainly does this business to make money. Of course, he also had a passion for exploring the sea when he was young. But like most people, the enthusiasm when he was young is difficult to accompany his life. And now he felt that it was time for this enthusiasm to burn out. While my mind is still normal, while the boundless sea has not entangled my fate, I should find a time to retire. Lawrence sighed slightly, turned around and walked slowly towards the captain's cabin. The search and questioning of the whole ship by the pastors has not yet ended. Before that, he cannot leave the White Oak. After that, he will be transferred to the church together with everyone and undergo isolation, observation, and a series of spiritual tests. Identification. His gaze scanned the familiar ship facilities around him. It's a fine ship and new, and I've only been in charge of it for 5 years. In the saying of the captains of the Great Sea, the captain and the ship are not yet married. Seriously, retirement is a bit reluctant. But retreating now is better than dying on some future voyage, or spending the rest of my life in a madhouse. In the lower part of the city-state, in the old Duncan antique shop, the middle-aged man lying on the bed on the second floor slowly opened his eyes and the slightly old and moldy ceiling was reflected in Duncan's vision. Duncan exhaled lightly, feeling that the perception from this body was quickly clear and stable, and felt that his control method of this body changed from remote control to direct control. Push yourself up hard. Pigeon AI flew over, rubbed its beak on the bedside, and yelled, "Honey, welcome home. Do you eat first, take a bath first?" Or Duncan was about to stretch his waist, and the pigeon was almost cramped when he said a word, so he slapped AI on the head. "Why do you have all kinds of words?" AI was obviously not an ordinary bird. After being slapped by Duncan, he acted as if nothing happened. He walked briskly to the side for 2 steps and continued to yell. "It's just a punch, it hit the nose and it was bloody. It's bursting, the nose is on one side, but it's like opening a saw shop." Duncan put the abnormal-minded bird aside and ignored him, got up from the bed and looked at the table not far away. On the table, various test items that he had prepared on the Lost Country were quietly placed. A sun talisman, a dagger, cheese, cannonballs, and a salted fish. Everything is complete, so many messy and irrelevant things are put together, and there is no packet loss phenomenon in EE. This pigeon is actually more reliable than I imagined. Duncan stepped forward to confirm everything on the table, and after confirming that the items were complete and undamaged, he couldn't help but look back at the pigeon pacing on the bed, and he still felt a little praise for the bird in his heart. Then he saw Ai walking in all directions by the bedside. At this time, he had already recited. When Lu Da looked at it, he saw Zhang Tu standing on the ground. Duncan, he hid the approval in his heart, and then sat at the table and began to check the condition of those goods one by one. The first is the sun talisman, which has not changed, as a transcendent item that has been completely transformed and controlled by the fire of the spirit body. There is still a docile power flowing quietly in it, and the 2 consecutive spirit world walks do not seem to affect it. The nature of the item. The dagger that didn't have supernatural attributes didn't seem to have changed, except for the old style. Its blade was still sharp, and the scabbard was also well maintained. Duncan's eyes fell on the piece of cheese that had been brought from the Lost Country's galley. There was no abnormality in the cheese, it was still in an inedible state, and it did not rot quickly or disappear out of thin air after leaving the lost homeland as Duncan imagined. He looked at the cannonball again. The cannonball sat quietly on the table, unresponsive to the captain's gaze. Duncan pushed the cannonball and tapped on its cast iron casing. The charisma faded from the shell. On the Lost Homelander, even the shells are active. Of course, this does not mean that each shell has an independent thinking, but that the entire ammunition system of the ship has a unified consciousness, control, and as a subunit of this consciousness, the shells on the Lost Country will even adjust their positions immediately and accept inspection when they are watched by the captain. According to Duncan's observation, for a period of time, the force part of the Lost Home should be controlled by 2 consciousnesses. One is the ammunition system, and the other is the dozens of artillery pieces below the deck. These 2 consciousnesses should be responsible for loading during combat, and firework, and control every member within their respective systems. The cannonball in front of him obviously escaped the control of its superior consciousness as it left the Lost Homelander, and turned into an ordinary iron lump. Duncan thought about it. If this shell is brought back, will it become a member of the ammunition depot again? Will Lost Home still recognize this subunit that has gone and returned? His thinking extended again. The ammunition on the Lost Homeland is limited, and the fired shells will not come back. The 8 shells that were used to press Alice at the beginning did not come back, so on the ship, can the ammunition be replenished? How did the added new ammunition become a subunit of the Lost Home? Extend the idea a little further. Can the Lost Homelander upgrade its artillery system? More advanced cannons, more advanced shells, can these things be used on that ship? The Lost Home is a ghost ship, which is doomed to be difficult for it to be easily replenished and improved like an ordinary ship. The things carried on the ship are only foreign items. If it cannot become the Lost Home smoothly part, then these foreign items cannot have the convenience of self-running like other facilities on the ship. But if there's a way to make these things part of the loss, that ghost ship might be more powerful. At the same time, have better living conditions. Duncan couldn't help thinking a lot about this. The more he came into contact with the modern Pulan city-state, the more he felt that the Lost Country a century ago was not as glamorous and perfect as its prestigious name. That ship may have a strange and terrifying power, but it doesn't even have a light, and it doesn't have chips. Its weapon system is still an ancient front-loading artillery. It is easy to use, but it is obviously good to have a steam engine as a backup power, but there is not even a boiler for heating hot water on board. And no chips. Duncan silently glanced at the pigeon that had jumped onto the windowsill and looked outside in a daze. Pigeon turned around and looked at him with mung bean eyes blinking. Go to the pier to order French fries? Shut up, don't mention the French fries. Duncan rejected the pigeon with a delicate mood and then focused on the last item. Salted fish, a pure natural food processed with delicious gifts caught in the deep sea, tastes good, and belongs to items other than the lost homelander. After going through the spirit world, the salted fish didn't seem to have changed much. Make soup for Nina tonight. Chapter 70 City-State Life. After examining all the test items, Duncan had a better understanding of AI's transportation capabilities and the nature of the items on the lost home. AI can transport several different items at one time, and these items include organic matter, inorganic matter, extraordinary things and ordinary things. The type of item will not affect the stability of the transport process, and the transport process will not affect the item by its very nature. Some apparently active things on the lost home are subunits of a larger control consciousness, such as shells, which are subunits of the ammunition system, and these subunits will lose their activity after leaving the lost home nature, become an ordinary thing. AI's transportation process doesn't seem to consume much of its energy. Whether it's the ritual dagger it carried at the beginning, or a bunch of things now, the bird is still alive and kicking after it comes back. The total amount of goods it transports is still too small, far from reaching its capacity bottleneck. At present, only different types of items have been tested. It is not yet known whether AI's transportation capacity has restrictions on weight or volume, which requires more tests. Duncan summarized the known information one by one, and after confirming that he had thought everything in place, he breathed a sigh of relief and slowly leaned back on the chair. He knows that the tests he has done so far are still far from perfect, and there are still many possible variables that have not been carefully considered. Even in terms of types of test objects, the samples he has selected are too small to accumulate enough valid data. In the future, he will at least choose more types of items, and at the same time use different item weights and item volumes to test AI's transportation limit and the stability of multiple transportations. Only with enough control samples can the test data obtained be justified, reliable and believable enough. He is very cautious in this regard, and this caution is not without reason because he has a very bold plan or idea. Since AI can transfer items between the land and the lost land intact and does not limit the type of items, then, can it be sent to people? If it can send people, can it send people who are not very good? Like Alice? Duncan knew that a person's abilities were limited. If he only relied on his ability to walk in the spirit world to act as the link between the lost homeland and the land city-state, sooner or later he would encounter the problem of insufficient manpower and carelessness. At this time, if there is a helper, the situation will be much better. The teleportation ability shown by the pigeon eye gave him a good idea. Of course, Alice is not a very good candidate for a helper. Although this abnormality 099 with a high-ranking number is elegant and mysterious when sitting quietly, as long as it is active, it will immediately reveal its useless nature. But at present Duncan really has no other candidates. Duncan couldn't help but sigh when he thought that the only available crew member under his command was a good-for-nothing who could cook himself. The position of the lost homeland as an enemy of the whole world really gave him a headache. He reckoned that it would be impossible for him to find allies from the human world. Just looking forward to the end of the world, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to cut gas pipes, every 2, 4, and 6 to engage in devil sacrifices, and on Sundays, to fight guerrilla bastards with church guards. That kind of thing can quickly collude with the goat's head. They can work together to invade a city-state when they have nothing to do, but it is definitely not the help Duncan wants. Well, at least Alice is obedient and obedient. Duncan stood up with a sigh and muttered to himself, if she is properly cultivated, she can grow up probably. Even if she can't be a helper, it's good to let that puppet see the world in the human world. After all, she has been locked in a coffin for so many years and she doesn't know what the outside world is like. After sorting out his thoughts, Duncan began to pack the pile of things he had brought over. He would not return to the lost homeland yet, and many of these things couldn't be carried with him, so they naturally had to be placed in the store. There are not many places to hide things on the second floor of the antique shop, and Nina will come up at any time to help clean up the room. Some things that obviously don't look like daily necessities in the room will be particularly suspicious, such as cannonballs from a century ago, but in a short time after thinking about it, Duncan found a reasonable place for these things. Just hide the sun talisman next to your body, and the salted fish can be put directly into the kitchen, which seems reasonable. The cannonball and the sailor's dagger from a century ago were even simpler. Duncan took those two items directly to the storefront on the first floor, and put them in an inconspicuous corner next to the counter. It was an antique store anyway, and there were as many messy things as they could be drawn, daggers and cannonballs thrown everywhere. It's better to throw it in the pile of tattered fakes on the first floor to hide. As for the last thing, Duncan also found a good place for the cheese he brought from the Lost Country's kitchen. In the trash. After dealing with all this, Duncan patted the dust on his hands that didn't exist, and was very satisfied with his arrangement. Then he glanced at the sky outside. The sun blocked by double rune imprisonment was hanging high in the sky, and it was just noon at this moment. Before Nina returns home later today, he plans to go out and walk around to learn more about the city. Anyway, it seems that this antique shop is not doing much business today. The weather was a little cool. Duncan put on a dark brown coat and combed his somewhat messy and decadent hair before going out, trying to make his decadent and weak body that had been tossed by alcohol, drugs, and diseases look be a little more energetic, and then leave the antique shop. As soon as he went out, there was a sound of fluttering wings from the second floor, and the pigeon Ae flew out of the room and landed on his shoulder, shaking his head and triumphantly. Go to Erxian Bridge, take Chenghua Avenue. Duncan cast a sideways glance at this guy. He originally planned to let the pigeon look after the house on the second floor. After all, it always looks too eye-catching and weird to wear a pigeon on his body when he goes out. Anyway, there is a spiritual connection between himself and Ae, really. In case of a situation, I can use the spirit body flame to summon it to my side at any time, and I am not afraid of delaying things. It's just that I forgot to confess when I went out, and the bird just get in the car on its own. Seeing the triumphant appearance of this Toriko, Duncan finally smiled helplessly and sighed. Forget it, just follow if you like. Carrying the pigeons like this, he came to the main road opposite the antique shop, and after walking along the main road not far, he heard a burst of crisp bells mixed with the sound of the steam engine running from far to near. Come on, looking up, a double-decker bus with blue stripes on a brown background is coming along the main road and gradually stops at the station not far away. It is a very common means of public transportation in the Pulan city-state. It is driven by a steam engine. The fare of 6 pesos can reach more than half of the lower city. According to the route map pasted on the back of the car, there are still the 2 stops will pass through the edge of Uptown, a place called Cross Street. Duncan had an impression of the Cross Street in his mind. He knew that the block and the surrounding area were regarded as the junction of the city-state of Pland, where there were more prosperous businesses and more decent residences. Many residents of the lower city with the Cross Street area is regarded as the goal and dream of one's life level, and many middle-class citizens who cannot afford the high consumption in the upper city and want to live a decent life also live there. There are also movie theaters, museums, and several high-end restaurants. Nina's school was near cross streets, and so was the museum she had mentioned. Duncan thought for a while, walked quickly to the station, and got on the bus before the bus started. There was no one on the bus. More than half of the seats on the first floor were empty, and a conductor in a dark blue uniform stood next to the driver's cab. This young woman with shawl hair and simple makeup saw someone getting on the bus. At first, he subconsciously reached out to touch the ticket holder, but then he noticed the pigeon on Duncan's shoulder. Sorry, pets are not allowed in the car, it's a rule, the young woman said, pointing to the pigeon on Duncan's shoulder, including the pigeon. Duncan looked at Ai, who flapped his wings innocently and looked at him with his head tilted. Go and pick on the roof. Cuckoo, cluck. Ai flapped his wings and flew out of the car, cursing the street while flying. The young conductor stared blankly at the man communicating with the pigeon, and the pigeon, who seemed to understand human speech, and remained silent for a long while. Is it okay now? Duncan had to remind the conductor, who seemed to be in a daze, and raised his finger to the direction of the roof of the car. You should have nothing to do with the bird falling on the roof of the car, right? Only then did the conductor come to his senses. Ah, yes. The fare is 6 pesos a pass. Duncan reached into his pocket, took out 2 coins and exchanged for a blue ticket, then found a seat by the window, sat down quietly, ready to enjoy his first car journey in this world. The steam engine was activated, and accompanied by a slight vibration and mechanical friction, the bell on the front of the bus also rang crisply, and then the bus shook slightly, and the scenery outside the window receded. Duncan leaned comfortably on the back of the chair, feeling the vibration and acceleration of this mechanical engineering creation during operation. A steam engine is a good thing, a civilized society is a good thing, and technological progress is a good thing. If there is a chance, he must also complete a set for the lost homeland, even if it is just a boiler that can heat hot water, so that hot baths can be taken on board in the future. As soon as his thoughts spread, he felt the car suddenly shake, and the scenery outside the window slowly stopped. The young lady conductor opened the window near the front of the car, leaned her head and yelled outside, "Get on the bus? There are seats. They are all big seats." Duncan was taken aback, then laughed dumbly. At this moment, he suddenly felt that this city-state, which was still unfamiliar to him, suddenly became full of life. Chapter 71. Our own people. In a world where extraordinary phenomena exist, land is blocked by endless oceans, and the defenders of the city-states and the anomalies are engaged in an endless battle. How do ordinary people survive? Duncan still lacked understanding of this city-state, but at least from what he saw, ordinary people in this world still lived in an orderly and stable environment. They work, study, and rest. They run shops and exchange what they have with each other. They go out on their days off, to theaters and restaurants, to parks and ports. They visit museums and chat with neighbors after dinner. They live a life that is not very exciting, but usually very stable. The steam-powered bus stopped and started, sometimes stopping at the platform, sometimes stopping at the roadside. Passengers got on and left at any time. The silent driver would occasionally say a few words to the conductor, but most of the time he was concentrating on driving. The young conductor would look up at the roof from time to time. She seemed to still be thinking about the pigeon. Duncan sat in his seat, observing everything around him with curiosity, watching the lives of ordinary people. It seemed that apart from the need to understand the anomalies and phenomena that existed in the world and to follow this knowledge as a safety code, the lives of these ordinary people were not much different from what he had seen on Earth. When approaching the cross street, the bus stopped again, this time at the platform, where many passengers got on. Duncan looked curiously at the scenery on the platform, at the chimneys standing in the distance and the steam pipes crisscrossing above the buildings, but suddenly he vaguely felt an unusual heat rising near his chest. The heat came from the sun badge that he hid close to his body. Duncan, who was enjoying the scenery, was stunned for a moment and subconsciously touched the place where the badge was hidden. The next second, he felt that the badge was not only hot, but also vibrating slightly. He didn't know what was happening, but it was obvious that the badge was resonating with something nearby through the connection that had been established between himself and the badge. He was unfamiliar with the source of this resonance, and the next second, his eyes were locked on a figure outside the car window that was walking quickly through the crowd. The figure was wearing a black coat and looked like an ordinary passerby, but the directional sense from the sun badge pointed correctly and without a doubt to that figure. Duncan immediately stood up from his seat and walked quickly towards the door. As he thought about it, the pigeon AI also received the instruction, flapped its wings and flew down from the roof and landed on his shoulder. The conductor standing near the door looked at this scene in amazement. It was not until Duncan got off the bus that he began to mutter, "How did you train this pigeon?" But then this little episode in daily life faded from the conductor's attention. She turned her head and looked at the passengers who had just boarded the bus. "Come over here to buy tickets. Children have to buy tickets too. They look over 1.1 meters tall. 4 years old? They can't be 4 years old. If they are over the age limit, they have to pay the full ticket price." At this moment, Duncan had already walked into the crowd. He walked quickly through the crowded platform and intersection, following the figure in the black jacket. The man in black walked very fast, and the dense flow of people on the road in the afternoon made it easy for him to avoid sight and search. In fact, after only a few minutes, the figure had left Duncan's sight. However, the resonance of the sun badge is still there, and the sense of direction coming from deep within the badge always points Duncan in the right direction. Duncan continued to follow the guidance of the sun badge while thinking quickly. There is no doubt that the man in black is very suspicious. The badge must have sensed something and it reacted suddenly. Perhaps it sensed the same power as the real sun god. He had learned from Goat Head that this badge had the function of identifying compatriots and guiding the blessing of the sun. But under normal circumstances, only believers of the sun god could use these functions or perceive the guiding effect of the badge. Duncan once used spiritual fire to usurp control of the badge, but at that time he thought that his fire had also destroyed most of the badge's abilities. But now it seems, the badge's recognition ability is still there. But now I have used this recognition ability for myself. Guided by the badge, he gradually left the busy main road, and after making 2 or 3 detours, he gradually walked into a deserted alley. He saw the suspicious figure again. The figure was walking quickly across the intersection ahead, seemingly unaware that there was a pursuer behind him. Faintly, Duncan felt that the badge on his chest became hotter than before, and the resonance it emitted became clearer and stronger. Duncan quietly activated the spiritual fire and read the information from the sun badge. A large amount of perceptions with clear directions immediately entered his mind. The feeling was very subtle. Although the sun badge did not have the ability to think, Duncan seemed to feel that the badge was conveying messages to him excitedly and thrillingly, telling him, a person who did not believe in the sun god, where other believers were. He even wanted to remind the badge to be more reserved. After all, it was a sacred object of the sun god not long ago, and it didn't need to be so excited to be a guide now, like a hand warmer. At the same time, he became increasingly certain that he was approaching a secret gathering place where many sun god believers gathered. Just as he expected, there were more sun heretics gathering in the dark corners of this city-state, and the group of people who had been wiped out in the sewers before were just a part of these cockroach-like cultists. He didn't know what these cultists were trying to do, but he knew that they must know more about ancient history, solar beliefs, and the age of order than Nina's teachers. If you want to understand the deeper secrets of this world, you have to get in touch with the forces in the extraordinary realm. It is difficult to approach the church and city-state authorities through normal means, but it is much easier for cultists just get along with them. Or you can just mix them together. Duncan was thinking this when he suddenly stopped. He had come to the end of a small path, and the sneaky man in black had just entered a nearby intersection. The signal from the sun badge was clear and strong, and there were no passers-by in sight. Through the sun badge, he sensed that there were more compatriot signals approaching his location. Duncan silently pulled up the lapels of his coat, hiding half of his face in the collar, and almost the next second after he completed this action, he heard many footsteps appearing in the shadows of nearby buildings. One figure after another appeared. There were more than a dozen people, and their attire was no different from that of ordinary citizens. After all, no cultist would walk around in a city in broad daylight wearing long robes, just as a normal assassin would not wear a conspicuous white hooded sweater to carry out his work on the streets of a busy city. Only the continuous heat and clear directional signals from the sun badge made him sure that every one of these guys who emerged from the surroundings was a follower of the true sun god. Duncan raised his head and looked towards the intersection at the end. He saw the man in black who he had been tracking before was also there. He was looking at him vigilantly. Next to him, a tall and thin young man whispered something to his companion before looking up. "Over here. This is private territory. Why are you sneaking in here?" The tall and thin man spoke. He seemed to be trying to create a feeling that everyone here is an ordinary citizen. "You were sneaking around, and that makes you look suspicious." Because he didn't know the background of Duncan, the tracker, he neither acted rashly nor let his guard down. Duncan muttered to himself that as an amateur he was not suited to such a professional job as tracking. At the same time, he was also curious about how these cultists would deal with him as a tracker. If he played dumb, would they pretend to be a group of dedicated evil forces to scare him away, or would they work diligently to develop their cult business and tie him up as a meaty treat for their sun god? "Didn't you hear me?" The tall and thin man frowned and said impatiently. As he finished speaking, the figures around him silently took a half step forward, forming a faint encirclement. "I'm asking you a question." Duncan shrugged, casually took out the sun amulet from his arms, and said sincerely, "One of us. Let's get along first, maybe there will be more things to say. If they don't believe it, then just get along." Chapter 72. Gathering in the gutter. The moment Duncan took out the sun talisman, there was a few seconds of silence. At the scene, his words, "One of my own people," floated in the air flatly, which brought about a dozen pairs of eyes meeting each other unexpectedly and cautiously. They looked at each other, and then the tall and thin man who looked like a small leader suddenly lowered his voice and said hurriedly, "Put it away quickly. Be careful that there are church eyeliners nearby. Does this amulet really work? Is this thing so convincing among sun cultists?" Duncan was happy in his heart, but on the surface he still maintained a mysterious posture with a blank face covering half of his face. While putting away the talisman, he said lightly, "If there is really a church eyeliner near here, a large group of you gathered together is better than me. The talisman is striking." As soon as he finished speaking, a man with a beard on the opposite side subconsciously said, "No, if we get together, we will at most attract the magistrate and disturb the public order. Shut up." The tall and thin leader immediately stopped the bullying of his subordinates, and then his eyes fell on Duncan. "This is a necessary caution after all. This city is very unsafe now. You come here, don't make any unnecessary moves." Duncan walked towards the opposite side calmly, and the other side looked him up and down carefully. After looking at him for a long time, the tall and thin man asked in a low voice, "Are you a believer living in this city?" Duncan thought for a while, then nodded, "Yes. The original owner of this body did live in the city, and he now lives in the city." On these obvious issues, he decided to tell the truth. His plan is very simple: find a way to sneak into these cultists, and then see if he can get any news, listen and ask more if he doesn't expose it, and let AI transform into pigeons and give them all to pigeons if he is exposed. The tall and thin man didn't notice any dangerous thoughts in the mind of this church fellow in front of him at all, but asked immediately, "As far as I know, the Deep Sea Church attacked a few days ago the gathering place in the sewers. There was a sun sacrifice there at that time. The ceremony got out of control. We lost a lot of people, but I escaped," Duncan said without any psychological burden. While paying attention to the reactions of the sun cultists around him, he could feel that the tense atmosphere on these people had obviously relaxed, but only the tall and thin little leader in front of him remained cautious. "There are 3 other people who escaped with me, but we got separated. Now I can't get in touch with the church at all until I met you. The sun gave me guidance." The tall and thin man hummed non-committally, and then his eyes fell on Duncan's shoulder. "What is this?" My pet, Duncan said casually, can't you tell? It's just an ordinary pigeon. I shook his head in a timely manner, making a loud cuckoo sound. This pigeon has such a loud voice. The tall and thin man seemed to have finally relaxed his vigilance, probably because he subconsciously felt that the church's fellows who abide by the rules and regulations would not have the habit of running around the city with a bird on their backs. He nodded. Come with me, it's not safe to talk outside. Duncan breathed a sigh of relief. He felt that the first step of fishing in troubled waters seemed to be successful. Then he followed behind the group of cultists and followed them deeper into the alley. The alley was deeper than he had imagined, and it seemed to lead to the most forgotten dark hinterland of this rundown urban area. A group of cultists led Duncan around, passing the old pipeline system that constantly released steam, passing through the alley. After crossing the path full of sewage, he finally circled into a group of low and dilapidated buildings, and the deeper he went, the darker and dilapidated side of this prosperous capital of steam was revealed in front of Duncan. Undoubtedly, he originally thought that the place where he and Nina lived was already a low-level community in the city, but now he suddenly realized that the dilapidated, antique store was already a respectable place in the lower city. Most of the dilapidated houses on both sides of the road are lifeless and seem to have been abandoned for a while, but in the shadows of a few houses, it seems that one can feel numb or gloomy gazes, as if there are homeless people hiding in this area. In the forgotten city, I was looking indifferently at the uninvited guests who broke into this place. But in the end, these gloomy gazes were quickly withdrawn. The dozen or so people brought by the tall and thin man were obviously enough to make the homeless people living here fear. See, this is the most prosperous city-state on the boundless sea, pure, and the man in black who first attracted Duncan's attention muttered, as if talking to himself or to Duncan, everywhere likewise, the same is true of Renset, and so is Cold Harbor, and even the light harbor of the elves, which is called the paradise of peace and justice. They claim that the so-called sun shines on the world fairly and brings light to all things order. But how much sunshine is there in these gutters? Duncan didn't respond but just looked up. He saw the steam and fuel pipelines spreading from the upper city and the industrial city crisscrossing the buildings above his head, and the huge valves and pressure-rectifying structures were entrenched like many grotesque behemoths. On the top of the low and dilapidated buildings around, the sun shines through the gaps in these pipes, causing the sewage between the buildings to emit an unpleasant stench. Most of the sewage was condensed from the steam leaked from nearby pipes. With the operation of the city, these sewage mixed with the chemicals in the factory and accumulated in the lower city day after day. It doesn't take long to live in this city. Duncan can roughly guess how this urban abscess appeared at a glance. Duncan silently glanced at the aggrieved man in black, his expression still indifferent. Bewitched by the sons of the sun, or forced by a harsh life, these cultists do have a reason for their birth, but so what? These cultists who thought they were persecuted by the city-state, and had to live in the gutter eventually came to the lower city to capture the helpless poor and make living sacrifices. There were countless ragged people in that cave. People, not a single decent person uptown. As a foreigner who doesn't know enough about this world, Duncan feels that he doesn't need to make too many comments on this city-state, but at least as a former sacrifice, he feels that these cultists are not a thing. In silence, he finally arrived at the stronghold of these cultists. The base is located underground in an abandoned factory. These cultists who burrow around in the gutters seem to always find a way to find a suitable gutter and transform it into their gathering place, or this prosperous capital of steam already has countless gutters, which are suitable for growing something dark and profane. A group of people crossed the half-collapsed courtyard wall outside the factory and opened the iron gate leading to the underground structure. Duncan originally planned to take a good look at the situation in the factory and satisfy his curiosity about the steam age, but it turned out that not finding a chance, he was taken directly to a sloping staircase leading underground, and came to the secret base of the cultists. It used to be a warehouse of a factory or a facility like a machine room, but it has obviously been evacuated now, leaving only the remaining pipe system on the roof and the gas that can no longer be lit on the walls in the huge space. Lamps. Dark spaces are dangerous, and even cultists know this, so they lighted oil lamps fueled with whale fat all over the ground, and under the light brought by a large number of oil lamps, Duncan saw that there were still more than a dozen cultists gathered here. After the church severely damaged a sacrificial field, there are still so many sun believers gathered together? Where did these cultists come from? Is it the same as mushroom moss, which grows whenever there is a gutter? Duncan looked at the figures gathered in the wide basement with some surprises, and those cultists also looked at him, a stranger who suddenly appeared, curiously and warily, and then the tall and thin man came over again. Almost a believer who looked quite strong and tall followed closely behind, standing around Duncan. Duncan frowned. Why, you have to search again after you come in? I didn't know there was such a rule. If you are really the church's eyeliner, a body search is useless, the tall and thin man said, and he took out a strip-like thing from his arms and handed it to Duncan. Relax, it's just a more rigorous verification. It's just necessary prudence. We have lost many compatriots to various reasons over the years. Take it and read it after me. Duncan glanced at the object handed over by the other party, and saw that it was a dirty piece of cloth, even something torn from old clothes, with dark brown stains on its surface, like dried blood. Is this another prop for the Sun believers to verify their compatriots? Duncan was a little surprised, and lamented that this is indeed a group of professionals who are hunted down all day long. Although the combat effectiveness is not obvious, the skills of preventing penetration from the outside and ghosts from the inside are really full. Then he took the things handed over by the other party, and heard the tall and thin men begin to mutter some sentences in a low voice. In the name of the sun, may the glory of the Lord shine. As soon as Duncan heard it, he felt very familiar. He only heard a cultist say this to himself not long ago. The cultist even gave him a talisman. Duncan raised his finger calmly, and a cluster of green flames that no one noticed immediately seeped into the seemingly ordinary strip of cloth in his hand. Afterwards, he kept a straight face and imitated the tall man in front of him. The thin man read the prayers over. The cloth that seemed to be soaked in blood remained obediently in his hand, seemingly unresponsive. The tall and thin man's eyes fell on the strip of cloth. After a long time, he finally nodded lightly. While reaching out to take the strip of cloth out of Duncan's hand, he said with a smile, "Welcome back to the glory of the Lord, compatriots." Chapter 73 Information on the assembly field. In all fairness, these cultists are actually quite cautious. They didn't believe the words of this strange compatriot just because Duncan took out the sun amulet, nor did they easily believe these statements because Duncan told the story of the sewer sacrificial ground. They observed Duncan's words and deeds along the way. Even after arriving at the venue, an additional verification was required to confirm the identity of this stranger as a group of cultists hiding in XE. They have done their best, but all their screening measures deal with Duncan as a normal human being. These tactics meant nothing to the captain of the lost home. The tall and thin little boss took back the inconspicuous strip of cloth from Duncan's hand. He seemed completely unaware of any changes in the power of this extraordinary item. After expressing his welcome to his new compatriots, he raised his finger and pointed to a corner of the meeting place. "Compatriots, rest here first. You are not the only strange face here." Duncan nodded and walked towards that inconspicuous corner, while paying attention to every face that appeared in the assembly hall. Unlike what he saw in the sewer sacrificial place before, he was surprised to find that none of these sun believers were wearing the iconic black robes, but dressed like ordinary citizens, and they didn't wear hoods to cover their faces. Instead, he exposed his face frankly. He curiously asked the believers beside him, "Don't everyone need to cover their faces when they gather here?" The believers who were questioned by him seemed very surprised. "You local believers in the Pulan city-state had to cover their faces when they gathered?" Duncan immediately frowned slightly. "You are not prand. We come from Rensa," another believer next to him said frankly. After confirming that the stranger in front of him is really a member of the church, the Sun followers here obviously let go of their guard. Everyone just settled down last week. But before we could establish contact with our compatriots in the area, the attack happened. Everyone here is from Lunza. Duncan was a little surprised. He finally knew why there were so many Sun believers in this city after the sacrificial ground in the sewer was destroyed. Well, all the compatriots from Lensa gathered here, but there are also teams from other city-states, and everyone is scattered in different strongholds. Another believer next to him participated in the conversation. "Oh, Pran, everyone has heard about the situation in the city-state more or less. In the past 4 years, that damned consul and the hyenas of the church have been attacking our cause. It's not easy for you, but fortunately, it's over." Duncan nodded non-committally, and then heard the believer he questioned at the beginning, "The pigeon on your shoulder is really unique." Duncan's eyes twitched. He knew that more than one person was paying attention to the pigeon on his shoulder. If you have to say it, there is nothing strange about a pigeon, but it would be weird to come to the rally with a pigeon on your own. He could only perfunctory. "This is my pet, it can help me do many things." He was perfunctory here, but the thoughts in his mind had already surged rapidly. A large number of followers of the Sun were pouring into the city-state of Purand, which confirmed one of his previous guesses. The Church of the Sun, which has always been low-key, has suddenly engaged in a high-profile event in the sewers. These cultists really want to do something big. This time he sneaked in by taking advantage of troubled waters, and unexpectedly found the right direction. At the same time, he also understood why the cultists attending the rally here did not hide their faces, but dress like ordinary citizens. In the sewers, before, the Sun believers' outfits that completely concealed their identities, and the single-line connection system between low-level believers were all to resist the church's round after round of suppression, and at the same time avoid traitors within the church or key members being arrested and leaking secrets. The situation is a last resort choice of the local church in dire straits, and the rabble who have just gathered from various city-states to Poland in front of them obviously have no experience in this field. They are only cultists after all, not strictly disciplined special forces. On the other hand, there is no need for them to carry out this kind of disguise, because the people gathered here are all fellow villagers who came from the same city-state. They are already familiar with each other, and it is meaningless to conceal their identities during the assembly. The ordinary citizens' attire now makes it easier for them to escape immediately when their strongholds are exposed, and disperse and mix among the civilians in the lower city who lack strict management systems. Thinking so in his heart, Duncan's eyes also swept across the assembly hall, and suddenly he felt a line of sight falling on him. He immediately followed his feeling and saw the owner of that line of sight. A petite girl with short black hair was standing more than 10 meters away. The girl was wearing a black dress with white lace. Her appearance was delicate and quiet. She looked about the same age as Nina, and the most striking thing was that she was wearing a dark red collar around her neck. There is a delicate silver bell adorned on it, which looks cute, but also extraordinarily weird. When Duncan turned his gaze away, the girl also happened to turn her gaze to other places. Naturally, she shifted her gaze quietly, but Duncan dared to conclude that the gaze just now definitely came from this young girl. Why is there such a young child among these cultists? Duncan couldn't help but have doubts in his heart, and at the same time, he took another look at the girl's attire. For some reason, he always felt that the girl was out of place with the environment here. While thinking about it, the sound of door hinges turning suddenly came from not far away, and the tall and thin leader of the cult ordered to close the door of the basement, and then he walked towards the middle of the meeting place. All eyes on the scene immediately focused on the leader. Duncan also restrained his thoughts and paid attention to the changes on the scene. He saw the tall and thin man standing in the eyes of everyone with a confident and calm attitude, showing a slightly sinister look. There was a smile on his face, and then he took out another thing from his arms and held it high among the crowd. It was a pale golden sun mask, exactly the same as the mask worn on the face of the cult priest who presided over the sacrificial ceremony in the underground assembly hall. Pay homage to the glory of the Lord, and recite the truth silently under the watchful eyes of the Lord, the tall and thin man said loudly, his tone extremely pious. Bow your head to this blessed mask. May the protection of the children of the sun rest on it. Help I guide my brothers and sisters gathered here. The believers around immediately chanted the name of the real sun god in unison, then put their fists between their eyebrows, bowed their heads in a gesture of respect. They were not paying tribute to the tall and thin man in the center of the assembly hall, but it was a tribute to the golden mask, as if the mask was the body of a superior person, and the man holding the mask was just a carrier. Duncan also pretended to be among a group of cultists, but he didn't know what the so-called mantra was, so he muttered a few multiplication tables in his mouth and began to seriously observe the behavior of these cultists. The meaning behind each link is reversed. The tall, thin man put the mask on his face solemnly. In the next second, Duncan immediately noticed that there seemed to be some kind of change in this man. He couldn't explain what was going on with this feeling. It was as if the other party had changed his temperament the moment he put on the mask, and it seemed that there was an extra shadow in his figure. Duncan looked at the figure imitating the sun. The golden mask, seeing the lines on the mask, seemed to be walking slowly. At this moment, the mask seemed to come alive, as if a distant and powerful consciousness projected its tiny power onto the mask, making the original ordinary objects take on extraordinary qualities. Ordinary people who wear masks, with this wearing action and this brief ceremony, complete the sanctification and become a symbol of some kind of divine power. The surrounding believers sighed in unison, "May the glory of our Lord last forever. May the way of our Lord come to the world." Duncan memorized the multiplication table to the 6th column, recalling it quickly in his mind. He had also seen a priest wearing a golden mask at the meeting place in the sewer before, but the priest had already completed the process of wearing at that time. In addition, Duncan still didn't understand the surrounding situation at that time, and the temporary body he used was not in good condition. Good, so he didn't realize what was so special about this seemingly ordinary golden mask, and he didn't think about why the priest wearing the mask was called messenger by ordinary believers. Looking at it now, could this so-called sun mask be the communication device used by the children of the sun hiding outside civilized society to remotely control believers and observe the world? Or more accurately, some kind of psychoprojection device? After suddenly realizing that it was a very interesting item, The way Duncan looked at the golden mask suddenly changed. This thing, maybe it has something to do with him. Chapter 74. In complete memory, Duncan quickly withdrew his gaze from the golden mask, let himself lower his eyes slightly like the ordinary believers around him, and pretended to be ready to listen to the teaching seriously. He hadn't heard anything useful enough to get the cult's attention too soon. And the moment he lowered his head, the feeling of being swept by someone's gaze came over again. Duncan frowned slightly, and following his feelings, it was indeed the girl in the black dress with the strange bell around her neck who was secretly observing him, and when his gaze turned away, she turned away calmly. Too much. This made Duncan extremely puzzled. He was convinced that he didn't know her, and there was no information about the girl in the memory of the original owner of this body. Why did a follower of the sun god who met for the first time pay attention to him so often? Is it because the pigeon on his shoulder is really unique? He just thought about it for a while, and then he heard the voice of the leader of the believers suddenly coming from the front after wearing a golden mask. The leader has become the embodiment of some kind of divine power, and even the voice when he speaks is low and deep. He became majestic, and he didn't know if he deliberately controlled the voice, or if the mask really mixed another consciousness into his voice. The prayer is over. The Lord has witnessed our piety and reverence. Grace has shined on our souls. Brothers and sisters, be grateful. We have persisted in this difficult and dark world for one more day, and we are far away from the scorching sun. The day when health and order will be recast is one day closer. The priest wearing a golden mask opened his hands and spoke in a very bewitching tone, and then his eyes suddenly fell on a corner among the believers, and his tone was calm and friendly. However, before proceeding to today's assembly, we would like to welcome two compatriots who were once trapped in darkness during difficult times, but thanks to the guidance of the Lord, they were able to return to the community. Let me introduce myself. Simple. Two compatriots? Duncan suddenly remembered that the leader seemed to have told him that he was not the only strange face in this rally, and then he looked in the direction the leader was looking at. He saw the man and the girl in black dress. For some reason, he was not surprised. You can call me Shirley. The girl naturally took half a step forward and said in a calm and generous manner, "My parents are both believers, but unfortunately they were killed by the minions of the Deep Sea Church 4 years ago. Block, have never been in contact with other siblings. Fortunately, you are here." Her voice was not loud, and she sounded quiet and well-behaved. If she hadn't seen it with her own eyes, it would be really hard to connect such a child with a bloody cultist. "Welcome back to us, young sister." The leader nodded, and then looked at the surrounding believers. Zulai's parents were killed by the church's purge 4 years ago. We were on the list back then. The names of her parents were found on the website, followed by another sibling. The leader's eyes finally fell on Duncan. Duncan, live in the lower city. Duncan had already made preparations and stepped forward calmly. A few days ago, the Church of the Deep Sea destroyed a sacrificial ceremony in the sewer. I am a survivor. He spoke very briefly, but his attitude was sincere and candid enough, and the news of the Church of the Deep Sea raiding the stronghold of the sewer cult was well known and occupied the front pages of several newspapers, so immediately after his words fell, several believers around him started talking in low voices. The leader in the center of the assembly hall nodded and added the situation. This is also a tried and tested compatriot. After experiencing the devastation of those hyenas in the Deep Sea Church, he is still trying his best to return to the embrace of the Lord. He has the blessed emblem on his body as a token, which is trustworthy. After the leader's words fell, those believers who didn't understand the situation at the scene immediately cast their eyes on Duncan. Some nodded and others sighed. Duncan continued to cover most of his face and recited the multiplication table backwards. The brief introduction is over. At this moment, the leader finally spoke about the part that Duncan was interested in. Next, we will announce the latest situation. Duncan's ears perked up immediately. At present, a large number of compatriots are still gathering in this city-state, including ordinary believers with firm beliefs, as well as powerful messengers and priests. Our power in this city-state is gradually increasing, and the order is being reshaped. The day is drawing near. However, it is undeniable that the minions of the Church of the Deep Sea have also reacted. Recently, the city-state authorities have become more stringent in their investigations of foreign populations. Several of our gathering points have also been destroyed by the authorities. Therefore, brothers and sisters who are active in the city must be careful. The collection of sacrifices can be slowed down. The Son of the Lord has issued a metaphorical order. We have collected more than half of the power recently, and there are still gaps. The Son of the Lord will personally solve it. The surrounding believers seemed to be greatly moved immediately, and began to praise the kindness and greatness of the Sun God. Duncan immediately thought of the sacrificial ceremony he saw in the sewer before. These cultists were indeed in the sewer, using that kind of ritual to gather power, and it sounds like The group of behind-the-scenes manipulators known as the Children of the Sun actually participated in this time. At present, the strength gathered by this group of cultists seems to be insufficient, because the City Hall and Church of Puland have been aware of their activities. But if those sons also go to battle in person, I am afraid that the plan of this group of cultists will continue to advance. At this moment, he heard the leader continue to say, "Our most important task at present is to determine the specific location of the sun fragments. Remember, our goal is always to bring the real sun god back to the world and to find the sun god. The missing sun shard is the most important link." Duncan's heart skipped a beat. Shards of the sun? What is that? Can a stack of sun shards make Spear of a Dun even bigger? He felt the pigeon on his shoulder suddenly become restless, and AI let out a low cooing sound from his throat while shaking his body vigorously. Through the connection from the fire of the spirit body, he could vaguely sense what the pigeon wanted to do. It wanted to shove loudly, to get Duncan to get the solar tomahawk, and to call in another wave of troops. But it can't talk, it's just a pigeon here. This can make it depressed bad. Quiet. Duncan could only murmur in a low voice, and at the same time rubbed the pigeon's head with the back of his hand to show comfort. Approximate location? Is there any way to detect it? The fragments of the sun are currently in a dormant state, and cannot be detected by any means yet. The leader shook his head, but the Lord has sent down guidance, and the fragments should be hidden near the lower city of Prand. In addition, considering that today there are new compatriots join, let me explain the situation again. According to the information we have, the fragment first appeared in the human world 11 years ago, and it is very likely that it triggered a large-scale supernatural phenomenon, maybe a large fire, or an abnormally high temperature in the entire block. It may also be collective spontaneous combustion, group hallucinations, which is exactly the direction of our investigation now. The city-state authorities have detailed information about extraordinary phenomena over the years. The great gods have already tried to find these records. Some ordinary people living in the lower city may still remember the strange things that happened here 11 years ago. Our task is to collect clues in this regard, in order to deduce the location of sun debris. But be careful, you must be careful in all inquiries. Although the authorities have always been loose in the management of the lower city, the hyenas of the Church of the Deep Sea sometimes have a particularly keen sense of smell. They have already become vigilant. The leader explained the current situation to the surrounding congregants, and Duncan's mind was also spinning rapidly. He paid special attention to the time point 11 years ago. According to the leader, 11 years ago, it was the day when something otherworldly called a shard of the sun manifested itself, but Duncan noticed this moment because of something else. 11 years ago, 6-year-old Nina lost her parents. It seems to be because of a fire. Is it just a coincidence? Is there such a coincidence? Duncan tried his best to sort out the messy and broken memories in his mind, but more than half of these memories had dissipated with the death of the original owner of his body. He tried his best to recall, but he could only remember one or two vague fragments. The original owner of this body rushed out of the fire, holding his dying niece in his arms. Behind him, an invisible building burned and collapsed. Indistinct, frantic crowds are running wildly on the street. Chapter 75. There is an insider. Terminate the transaction in the end. Duncan didn't dig out more memories from his mind. Although the original owner of this body did care about Nina, and the things related to Nina were indeed the deepest memories in his mind, years of illness, alcohol, and drug abuse have severely damaged these things. When the cultist named Ron breathed his last breath, there were not many tender memories of his family left in his numb mind. The only thing that is certain is that there was indeed a fire 11 years ago, and it happened in the lower city. That fire took the lives of Nina's biological parents and changed the child's life trajectory forever. This may be a coincidence, but it is more likely that this incident is really related to the sun fragments that these sun cultists are looking for. The sun fragments that appeared unexpectedly caused a fire in the city. Innocent citizens lost their lives, and a child became an orphan in the fire, and after a few years, the child's only relatives degenerated into evil spirits who followed the sun fragments. One of the believers, in the dark, it seems that there is an evil fate, and this evil fate revolves around the sun, as if trapped in gravity. At this moment, someone from the surrounding believers suddenly spoke, interrupting Duncan's thoughts. I have inquired about the situation among the surrounding residents these days, and I have never heard of any famous buildings in the lower city 11 years ago. However, someone mentioned that there was a leak in a factory that year, and the poisonous gas from the storage tank spread for several blocks, and many people were hallucinating and crazy, and it was even in the newspapers at the time. Duncan looked up in surprise and saw that the person speaking was an ordinary-looking female believer. But before he seriously thought about what the other party said, he noticed that the cult leader's eyes turned to himself. Compatriots, you happen to be a local here, do you know the situation in this regard? Duncan was taken aback and suddenly realized that he had become the focus of the scene for the group of out-of-town believers who were trying to gather information. He, a local who lived in the lower town of Pland, was undoubtedly a very good piece of information. Source. Noticing the sights coming from around him, he thought for a while before deciding what to say. I didn't live here 11 years ago, so I don't know the specifics, but the leak from the factory has indeed been mentioned while perfunctory like this. He looked at the female believer who spoke just now. 11 years ago, there was really no fire in the lower city. At least that's what I've heard, the believer nodded. According to what I heard, there hasn't been a relatively large fire in the lower town of Perland for at least 20 years, such as there are small fires like kitchen fires, but that's obviously not a consideration. Duncan blinked, but said nothing. He clearly remembered that Nina's parents died in the fire 11 years ago. The memory fragments in his mind even had a picture of himself leading Nina out of the fire scene. Where did this go wrong? Was it a disorder when this body inherited the memory? Or that the fire was not in the lower city? Or, just because the cultist in front of him failed to find out the real situation? There was a slight doubt in his heart. Because the matter involved Nina and myself, he subconsciously paid attention to this matter, and at this moment, he heard another voice from the opposite side. It was the person named Zulai's girl. The factory leak 11 years ago, was it the one that happened in the 6th Street? 6th Street? Well, it seems right. The female believer nodded. It is said that this incident had a great impact at that time, because the chemical substances left many people with sequelae, and many residents in the lower city still remember it today. With it, a few believers next to him nodded and agreed, and it seemed that they had also heard about the same situation. Leakage from the factory. The leader in the center of the assembly hall suddenly broke the silence, and his deep and dignified voice also interrupted the conversation among the believers at the scene. The production accident on the surface is very likely to be an extraordinary event disguised by the authorities. And it happened exactly at this note 11 years ago. This is a very important clue. Next, we will investigate in this direction to see if the so-called factory leak points to the sacred sun fragments. The believers at the scene nodded immediately, and then the masked leader said, in addition, we must not only pay attention to the extraordinary events that happened in the lower city 11 years ago, but also pay attention to the recent events in the city-state of Purdue. Something unusual. Although the sun fragment is still sleeping, its awakening day is approaching, and its activity is increasing every day. 4 years ago, our church compatriots tried to awaken that fragment in advance. Although the attempt failed at that time, even because of the failure of the ceremony led to the crazy strangulation of the Church of the Deep Sea, but the attempt at that time was not completely ineffective. The stimulation of the awakening ceremony further deepened the connection between the sun fragments and the real world, which was enough for it to be completely awakened for a short period of time. With the power to interfere with reality, this may help us find it. Recently, pay more attention to the newspapers in the city-state and the rumors in the streets and alleys. All unusual events may point to the sun fragments. Don't let go of any clues, understand? The believers bowed their heads and respectfully accepted the order. Duncan noticed another key point mentioned by the leader. 4 years ago, the Deep Sea Church of the Puland city-state did destroy the largest sun heresy stronghold in the city in one fell swoop. It is said that the incident was extremely powerful at the time, and it was the battle of the current city-state Judge Vanna, and after that, the sun cultists in this city fell into a slump until today. For a long time, Duncan has only known this part of the superficial information. Now it seems that the truth of this matter is because the sun cultists in the city at that time wanted to wake up the sun fragment sleeping somewhere in advance? Unknowingly, a series of truths hidden in the past were revealed in front of Duncan. He quickly combined the known fragments of information in his mind, and at the same time thought about how to get more information from these cult members. But just at this moment, a strange smell suddenly entered his nostrils. It smelled like burning sulfur, mixed with some kind of sour and pungent chemical smell. In the next second, the surrounding ordinary believers also smelled this pungent and obvious smell. Some people looked at each other, as if looking for the source of the smell, but the leader standing in the center of the assembly hall reacted instantly. He took out a talisman in the shape of the sun in his arms. That talisman was exactly the same as the sun talisman Duncan was carrying, and its surface was burning with an illusory translucent flame. The pungent smell came from the flames. Dirty impurities. The flame has been deceived. The leader glanced at the burning sun talisman, and his voice was filled with shock and anger. There is a heresy hidden among us. There was an uproar at the scene. Duncan's first reaction was that he had been exposed. Although he didn't know how he was exposed, the sun talisman on the leader's body seemed to have finally recognized him as a heretic who didn't believe in the sun at all. Thinking of this, He sighed slightly and was about to release the pigeon, but before he could make a move, he heard another sigh coming from the opposite side. The sigh came from the girl in the black dress, a girl named Shirley, who shook her head regretfully. I knew Agu was unreliable, and the disguise couldn't last for 3 hours. Before the words fell, a group of pitch-black flames suddenly exploded beside the girl. The flame was born out of thin air with the shape of fire, but it was as black as a shadow. It ignited on the girl's arm, and spread to almost a third of her body in a second. The next moment, Shirley's right half of her body they seemed to have turned into firewood for a black fire. The flames flowed down amidst crackling noises, and the part in midair turned into a dark chain, while the part that fell on the ground condensed into a bony, covered body in the blink of an eye. Burning monster. It was a pitch-black demon dog, a huge dog as tall as half a person. Its body seemed to be made up of countless twisted and stacked bones. Where it should be flesh and blood, it was full of burning black fire and wriggling flesh. Shadow, its head is jagged and ferocious, but the place where the eyes should be is empty and there is only a blood-red mist inside, filled with boundless hunger, thirst and malice. A pitch-black chain extended from the giant dog's neck to Zulai's arm, unexpectedly blending with the girl's body faintly. The Hound of the Darkness, the summoner of the Annihilation sect. The leader in the center of the assembly hall was shocked and angry when he saw this scene. What does this mean? Are you guys who worship the darkness going to fight the followers of the sun?
Thanks for joining Fanfiction Reader. If you enjoyed it, hit subscribe and come back for more fan-made adventures.